Hey, happy Saturday, everyone. This is Welcome to My Bubble with Jimmy Stevens, my long-awaited, the one I've promised probably for the longest that I wanted to have him, or I've said I wanted to have you in a hangout probably since like late last year or something when I first started chiming in on your YouTube videos. You and I had some good interactions. I liked the amount of thought you were giving things. So it's a pleasure to get to hang out with you today.
Thanks, Bert. Yeah, it's a blessing for me. I felt so bad. I remember you asked me, I think last August or something, I think it was.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
maybe it was more closer to September or something. And I had such a busy schedule with my job and everything. So it's.
Yeah, I think we were going to try to do something in January or something. Like I said, I'd catch up with you, and then I kind of petered out. Like I think when I got to March, I'd started going to like every other weekend or something, and I was starting to get tired of organizing them and I wanted to focus more on content. But ironically, I didn't get any more content done when I stopped doing these hangouts. It just got filled by other things. So, no, and the interesting thing with you is I think I've always had really quality engagements with you. I think that right up from the start, I felt like we had a bit of a rapport. Like I felt like you gave me some benefit of the doubt and were charitable and interacting, and I figured I tried to take a perspective of as long as I'm putting that out there, hopefully I can expect that back at the very least. And you reciprocated, which isn't always the case, with constructive responses and trying to help me to understand where you could see I wasn't understanding what you were saying, and I've appreciated that. So it's nice to kind of get together and chat through kind of your positions, and you can interrogate mine as well. But I'm curious to hear about kind of what your, do you come from a Christian household, and were you always born into a Christian household and find yourself going to church and pretty committed throughout your life?
Yeah. What's funny is you were just a second ago we were talking about the resonance of like a determinist and a Calvinist. And I would say that I was a determinist before I was a Calvinist. But also, ironically, I grew up in a Calvinist home. Mm-hmm. So, and it wasn't, I grew up in the dispensational side of Calvinism. So more of the, just throw some names out there, John MacArthur,
right.
D. James Kennedy, R.C. Sproul, sort of that realm, even though those are technically dispensationalists. But I grew up in a household that was pretty strongly Calvinist. My father was extremely interested in things like apologetics. I think I was 9 years old when we, as a Bible study, started reading I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And so these things were very strongly imbued.
When you said we read, is this an assignment, or is this your family reading together, or what?
This is my family would come together and do Bible studies, and they would be different things at different times. But I remember one year we sat down and we're going to read through that book. I don't think we ever made it through, but just as an example of how much
the ending's really good in that book. But not enough faith to be an atheist. When you get to the end, it's really good.
Yeah. Oh, Frank Trick. So yeah, just as an example, my upbringing is very much has that backdrop of, apologetics is good and awesome, and maybe it was even a little bit too aggressive, just from my standpoint now. So yeah.
So you guys, your family would actually study other materials beyond Bible study. You would have, we did similar things. Like we would have a certain book we were going through and work through it. The church that I went to in Columbus was very intense. It actually, I think, freaks out most people, even Christians, when I talk about what that experience was, because it's kind of 24/7 with that community, like that whole group.
Really?
Yeah. There was sorry, I'm finishing fruit salad. I should stop.
It's good.
I'm like, oh, it's a grape peel. Oh. but the church that we lived in was a very kind of modeled itself after kind of a first century community that all lived within each other, had a lot of accountability in a welcome way. It wasn't coerced or forced on us or anything like that. It was something we wanted to do, and a lot of students. It was a very dynamic church with a lot of studies. There was, like I would go to Saturday study. In the evening, usually there was some type of fellowship thing or whatever. All throughout the week, I would have studies that I would be doing over at the dorms with students, but we'd also have like a Friday group study over at there was a house on a campus in Columbus, Ohio for the Columbus Community College. We'd go over there and have the Friday night Bible study. So I was probably doing like 15 to 20 activities every week or whatever. It was very, very, very intense and very good. Like it felt like it was a very happy time for me. I think that's what I try to convey to people, is that I don't have a sad story there. Like that was not something I was eager to leave. It was very felt very natural to me. It felt very it was very rich. There was a lot of it wasn't charismatic. It was a bit more focused on digging into theology, like a lot of the Bible studies. Some of them were very the ones that were. I was in a couple that say had a bit more of a higher level of study going on with some of the elders in the church, and those were really tough. Like by the end of it, I was getting into some stuff that was really challenging to understand. It was hard stuff to wrap my head around. But it was but as well, like it wasn't a cold faith at all. Like it was a very a dynamic. It was very dynamic in my life. It was causing me to go out, and I was constantly. I was happy all the time, and we would go out and do. We had I helped organize a group called. They called it the Barn Burners, but it was actually Barn Builders, I think is what we called it. But we would go around and do community projects and things like that. We would do community watch, or we would work with we were in the inner city, and so we'd do work with the kids in the community there. They were all pretty tough kids.
I remember watching. I think you were talking to Deidre, and you were telling her how you were so invested in being evangelical with those groups that you got to the end of your semester. Who was it? It was like your.
Oh yeah.
One of your teachers was like, yeah, like
that was the junior or senior year. Like that was the portfolio review where you were starting to get to the point where they were critiquing kind of your collection of work, because when you graduated, you needed to go out and do interviews with illustration houses, or with, like in my case, I was kind of visual effects and illustration. So I had about a portfolio kind of for both. I had a demo reel of my visual effects work, and then I had my regular portfolio, which was illustration work. And I would get I did an internship at a big facility in Columbus, Ohio for my summer year. Or I guess that was, I had mono one semester, so I had kind of 2 senior years. Over the summer of one of them, yeah. I had to drop out that semester, so then I had like 4.
I can imagine, that's terrible.
4.5 or 5 years, yeah. Well, I think that looking back, I think it was I was burning the candle at both ends. Like I was trying to be a student, but I really saw my primary goal, and this is what I think you were getting at, was that my primary goal of being at school was, I felt like, to minister to students. God had brought me there to bring students to Christ, and
right.
So I'd go over the dorm. I probably had we would. That's actually how I eventually got my. So my wife and I are an interesting story. We were actually doing student ministry together. So we would go out and talk to students. She was going to the school, but she had already graduated at Ohio State, so she was doing kind of a second year, but she really saw her purpose being in colleges as ministering to students. And that's kind of how I latched onto that as well. She was going back to school to have exposure to other students and be able to be in their lives and engage with them in a meaningful way. And so we would go, when freshman year kind of came through, it helped students move in. We would form friendships. This was sincere on our part. Like I genuinely care for these people, and I would hang out with them otherwise. But eventually we would ask them if they wanted to study the Bible. We would, and we would drive over on Saturdays and pick students up and bring them to church. So she would give me her car. And we were just friends at the time. She's 5 years older than me. So it was kind of like, and she was kind of like a shepherd to me. Like she was someone who was guiding myself. Like I was young in the faith, and I was kind of helping her out. But eventually we became peers over time. Like as I gained understanding and became more mature in my faith. Then
your Spurgeon beard was
yeah. Well, yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. Actually, that's kind of interesting too, because you were talking about being a Calvinist or determinist your entire time, but I'll tell you about kind of how I became one at the time. But so we would drive over to the campus and on Sundays and pick up the students, and then eventually we would take them to the other Bible studies if they were interested, and they became very themselves dynamic, and they started teaching Bible studies themselves. It was kind of this revival that was going on at that campus church that we were part of.
Nice.
We were also part of InterVarsity, so we had a foot in that as well. Half the students would go to Vineyard. I'm sure you're familiar with Vineyards.
I because of conversations you've had, that name has come up in my. Yeah,
so Vineyards, I think it's like a Midwestern primarily. I think there might be a couple in California too, but they're kind of a big church, but it's more of they have the full band up on stage, and it's probably at the time I thought it was a little weak or a little superficial, right?
The mega church theology.
Yeah, it was a little mainstream. It wasn't quite as bad as what you'd see on like TV, but it was probably if they had that type of pull, they probably would have done that type of thing.
Right.
Gotcha. And so actually we were friends for 3 or 4 years doing this and fell in love through that process. And then actually we never dated. We got engaged right away. Like we went on a walk one day and then kind of confessed our love to each other and decided we were going to get married all in the same day.
Wow.
Without any dating or anything. So that's the part that kind of freaks people out a little bit. They have a hard time understanding how all that type of stuff happens or whatever.
Yeah, I imagine. That's really fast.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you're talking about our relationship, or are you talking about?
No, the engagement. The engagement.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Well, the thing is, you could argue that we had been dating for years, right? Like that's the thing is we were eating meals like together all the time. We were doing all of this work together. We basically saw each other all the time, and I think we kind of I think I was a little slow to realize what was going on. I think she knew. she would. It's a little funny is that she would send me letters when I went back home because I was still going back home for the summer. So like maybe junior year or
written letters.
Yeah, she'd send me. Yeah. There actually wasn't.
That's serious right there.
Well, there was an email at the time, or there was, but nobody. There was, but nobody had it, right? Like this is like 92 or 93. Before, I mean, we were.
Yeah, but here, Brett, I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt here about your age.
I'm 43. So the thing is that she would send me letters, and I would open these things up, and they would reek of perfume, like she had just laced it, and rose petals would fall out, and then the content of the letters would be, "We can't have a relationship. I have devoted myself to God." like both signals going on, right? I'm getting turned down and enticed at the same time. So she was completely confused. But I'm hogging the mic now. This is Jimmy Stevens interviewing Bert Poole. But the funny thing with
fascinating.
The funny thing with, so you had mentioned Spurgeon, and I've talked about it. My son's middle name is Spurgeon, and I ate up when I became an atheist. One of the things I didn't have to part ways with it, but I wasn't going to do anything with it anymore. Is I had like all the volumes of Spurgeon's sermons. Like I had this beautiful hardbound 30 volume set or whatever, And he was like a big influence on me. And I remember my freshman year when I went to Bible study and converted and started eating up materials. Like over the summer, I went back in New Hampshire. It was very different than Ohio. I had to really seek out, because it's kind of a Roman Catholic, more formal. There's a lot of Protestant churches, but there are no evangelical churches. I wouldn't call them evangelical. You had like, maybe there was an Assembly of God that had like 10 people going to it or something, but like there were no churches. You wouldn't go to a Bible study where I grew up. There were probably none to be found at the time. And so the thing is, I went to the Christian bookstore and I was just dying to get something to read, and I found this collection of Spurgeon's sermons. There was like this I think it was called Spurgeon's Sovereign Grace Sermons or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
And I took it, and I remember being in I talk about it every once in a while, that there's this field by this lake that I used to go and read at. I'd spend hours there just reading in this like long grass, and it was overlooking a lake. It was just the most beautiful spot. And I remember I had no clue about Calvinism, and I had no clue that Spurgeon was a Calvinist. I was just like, I'll just read these sermons, and I was very new to things. And I'm reading through it, and I'm like, wait, what's he talking about here? What's predestination, elect? Like, it was very, very much opposite of what I had thought was the case. And I thought for sure he must. And then by the end of it, by the time I got through all of them, I was completely persuaded that that was the case. So I was.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So I was completely persuaded that that was actually the case. That was kind of how I came to that. So that was kind of shocking. But
that's interesting. So you because I thought, I'm trying to remember now. I'm getting my stuff mixed up here. When I was watching videos when you were talking to.
You're getting your Bert lore confused.
I'm getting my Bert lore, like all this mythos I've built in my mind. No, wait a second. Okay, so you said that you're the church that you were a part of, or the church group that you were a part of, was very studious. Theological knowledge was like a big emphasis in that group. So now,
well, it wasn't with everyone. There was a missionary. There was actually a Korean missionary and his wife who had kind of founded the church there in Ohio. And they, there were, by the time I got there, I was kind of second generation of students. So like I think he'd started it probably in the 80s. And by the time I got there, everybody who was an elder or preacher or whatever, they were in their mid 30s to early 40s with, and it was there were a lot of people in the church who, like everybody was sincere and but not everybody was at the same level in terms of even a desire to get into that type of thing. So I would say it wasn't a church-wide thing to go deep into different aspects of theology. Right. That was certainly there in the messages, and the exposition and the Bible studies were very rich. But in terms of getting into like going through those were like my Saturday morning Bible studies, that there were like six students that they were particularly thought were engaged enough that they would be able to think about these things. So they were kind of fostering these, and certainly the people who were preaching were very, and leading the church, like kind of the elders were very knowledgeable and had a deep understanding. But that wasn't, I don't want to give the impression that was kind of, if you would go there and you would get this and you go, I'm not really into it or whatever. Like it was kind of it did appeal to kind of everybody or whatever.
Gotcha.
Sorry. So I'm sorry, you were calling some Bert lore there.
Yeah. So now it makes sense. So there's these. I'm curious because I know you still keep contact and talk with a lot of, or I shouldn't say a lot, but I know you said you keep contact with some Calvinist buddies of yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you still talk to any of those people back from your college?
Oh yeah. Yeah. There are two guys in particular on my Facebook that we talk fairly regularly. One one I met through the other, but the other one was, he was one of the guys who go to Vineyard, who was going to kind of the InterVarsity Bible studies.
Okay.
He was, ironically, I don't know, he might be watching this, but ironically at the time I thought he and the others were a little soft that were going over to Vineyard, but he's fairly hardcore now. He's actually, both of them are presuppositionalists. And I actually talk more with the guy I met through him than anyone, and we have excellent exchanges on Facebook. We both have, I think initially there was probably a couple of months of getting, realizing that neither of us was out to kind of pwn the other, but actually have some constructive dialogue. And now we'll talk about all sorts of different topics. And he said that, he told me at one point, he might be watching this too, or he will watch this anyway, I think. He told me that he used to be more kind of the Psi 10 variety, and really strawman to atheism and people's arguments, and didn't think much of it. And he said, actually, I was kind of happy. I felt like this was kind of a victory for me, was that he is much more slow to judge and won't resort to the types of arguments that Psi would, or that style would. I think he's more in a Van Tilian kind of mode. Not that he wouldn't have done that before. I never got his character is such that I don't think he's, I couldn't imagine him ever doing that to me, and I don't remember him doing it, but he says that he views it all differently now, which is encouraging to me, that we can have some respect and actually have some constructive dialogue then, on the assumption that we're going to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We're going to explain ourselves, and if I don't understand something, I can ask him and expect back kind of a sincere response. Totally. And I think definitely my Facebook for probably 8 or 9 years has been notorious for being, it got a moniker at some point, but it was from one of my friends. But it's kind of I used to have these just giant conversations on there, and anybody who would eventually join, like some of my coworkers would join my Facebook or whatever, and they would read it, and they'd talk to me at work later and go like, wow, you're able to have these conversations about these topics that the internet's known for being trollish and a nasty place to carry this type of discourse, and yet you guys are able to have that, and they even will appreciate the Christians for that aspect. So anyway,
that's awesome.
So I do have contact with some of them. It's a little my wife isn't thrilled about having a lot of contact with all the people she was super intimate with back then. So I think I've tempered a little. I haven't held back from extending friendship to anyone, but we haven't had any other outside of like social media. If it wasn't for social media, I don't know I would have had kind of this contact remaining or whatever. Like I think that helped facilitate. And I actually have never, like, none of them have ever cut me off because of the past or something. Like it's not that they don't try to persuade me. They're always trying to persuade me through our conversations. But I've never had any of them, just flame out and go like, well, you were always, I always thought you were an asshole or something like that. And then just like, oh, I'm done, I'm done here or whatever. So it's never been like, I don't have any problem being cordial and friendly and even engaging in pretty rich dialogue with some of them. So that's been, and some actually some of my good friends from back then, like I learned out years later that they became atheists as well. They're living in different places. So it's kind of interesting to get everybody's different perspective as they left that. Some are still there. Some have gone to other churches. Some have changed political or religious views. Some still are in that thread. Some have become more hardcore. Some have become less. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, just not to rant about it, but I just think it's kind of a silly perspective that there's like, some kind of denominational fence that protects you from apostasy. Like apostasy can be found in Calvinists and Arminians and all, anywhere, like happens all over the place. It's not really,
Yeah, I'm an apostate.
You're an apostate. It's true though. Now that I think about it, I wonder, is that word?
I'm fair
about a negative connotation? Like,
I'm fair about it in that I go like, how you view me is probably how I would have viewed me now too, right? Like if you talked to me back in college and you said, hey, you don't believe when you're 40, you're an atheist when you're 43. I'd say either I'm not going to be an atheist for long, like at some point I'll return to it. And I doubt that would be the case, but there's the possibility that, or I was never was, right? Like that's what I would say. Because if I'm going to believe that you're born again as a new creation, this isn't something that you opt out of later, right? Like it would, if it were the case, it would be a transformative thing without an ability to backslide. There wouldn't be any type of like backsliding back out of Christianity, right? If you believe in being born again and being a new creation in Christ and whatnot. So
right,
I get
exactly.
that. And so when somebody says to me, well, you were never a Christian, like I know where they're coming from. I don't take that as like an insult or whatever. Now I look at it and I go, I don't know how I could have been any more of one. Like there wasn't any indication there for 10 years where like I bore my soul to that. Like it was something that that was rich and powerful, and it destroyed me when I walked away from it. Like it was one of the toughest times in my life was that traversal out of it. So I would say, like, I look at it and I go, well, I don't think you're right. Like, I think actually I did believe, but I could never persuade somebody of that. So
sure,
yeah,
sure. And it's difficult because it's it's doctrinally built into the faith, right? So like,
yeah, I think people tend to see it as a dickish move or like just a cheap way to discount somebody's experience or whatever, or to go, well, you never. But I think that it's hard because it runs deeper than that. I think like there are commitments there that if you're going to hold the scripture, you can't see these things necessarily as being the case. Now I have some friends who do, and honestly, like I don't understand how they see scripture. It's a little bit for me like a young earth creationist as opposed to someone who believes in biological evolution and that humans descended from primates or from the same line, and that there was a and that after at Genesis 12:1 you take things literally, and before that it's allegorical. Like I don't understand those perspectives. So and that's the same for the person who would say, well, no, you were a Christian. Well, knowing scripture, I don't know how you can be someone who adheres to scripture and then thinks that I also was a Christian at the time. Right. Sure. So I kind of get that there's an inconsistency there that actually, ironically, I understand less the person who would be more charitable to my experience. So.
That's funny. Yeah. And I think like just to state the way I would look at people like that, I don't think it's a matter of their experience. Obviously there was a very deep experience there. Am I going to say that there even within other religions outside of Christianity, that there aren't these deep existential experiences? I don't think that's not the case. I just think, it's not really a matter of some magical faith leap. It's it's like me and you having this conversation right now. Like for me, real faith means the person of Christ, the Jesus of Nazareth, is with you wherever you go. So,
I think it does. It does raise an interesting. Well, for me now, it raises an interesting question of how, if I was persuaded, and I had, and there was nothing that I thought I could give more of to myself to this, that I had surrendered everything, and I genuinely felt that I had gone through a transformative experience. Like actually, for me, my change was overnight. Like it was literally that week. I remember I was actually kind of stunned. I was shocked at how much my behavior had changed when I thought about it, or even how I viewed people or whatever. Like it's kind of an overnight transformation for me. So everything ended up resonating. And as I read scripture, I felt that it spoke to me, and it wasn't just that I was getting concepts out, that I felt like I was getting the life out of it. Like I was kind of sucking at the marrow, right? And and so the thing is that when I look back on those 10 years, that's a cruel farce going on, right? Like that, with no way, like if I couldn't realize that I hadn't actually gone through that, that something real hadn't actually happened. And actually, even when I prayed or when I read scripture, actually I had times where I thought God spoke to me. Like there was one time in particular, it's actually my litmus test for Christians. I'll tell them, if you can tell me the name that God spoke to me at a certain time, there's this one moment, then I'll believe, because, and it actually doesn't have, like, people will go, well, what if it wasn't God? Well, but God knows the word that was, I think, was spoken to me. Like, he has access to my thoughts.
Sure,
So
yeah.
that's actually something. And when I say that, atheists just go like, dude, that's really stupid. Why are you doing that? What if they guess, right? Like, what if, and I know, knowing the name, the person will never guess it. It's not the type of thing that you just kind of pull out of your hat
Sure.
or whatever. Or pull, like, if you pull names out of hats. I don't know if you, well, I guess you do sometimes if you're
running a contest.
Yeah. That was pretty.
And the winner for this, the winner for belief today is
yes,
Bert.
yeah. If I hear it that way, right? Like if I'm like at a lottery or something and they pull it out and say the name, then I'm going to be fooled. Right. I mean, that could really do the trick for me. But the thing is that that's kind of an interesting notion to me, is that, like, you could be so self-deceived as to bring others to Christ, right? Like that there are people now who are believers because for 2 years or 3 years, we hooked up every, and got, I would drive by and bring them to church and all of that, right? You would think if the work hadn't been done, and it's a hard thing, because you're not going to have the view that you can earn your faith. It's not that you're earning it or anything, but surely there has to be something on the agent that is, if they're just going through this delusion of, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm like all the rest of you guys, and then you get away from it. You're like, oh wow, I guess I was hanging out with all those guys and didn't realize I wasn't one of them or whatever, right? Like, right. It's like finding out you're adopted or something. Yeah. Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm adopted, right?
Pretty much, that's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of what's been interesting for me is I did a video on this, was the God Loves Robots. That whole thing was motivated by seeing there was a set of memes going around at the time. There was like probably 3 or 4 weeks where I saw Christian anarchists posting memes and posting memes, and like all the Christians were posting all of these memes. And it was really interesting to me because it's been fascinating. Like when I was a Calvinist, we didn't have the internet. And so there weren't these like forums where people were clashing or anything. It wasn't like you were going to go down onto the Ohio State campus and run into a bunch of Arminians and have it out, right? Like that, this stuff kind of to some degree happens either at conferences or something. It would have happened at conferences, or it happens on the internet on forum boards or like on social media.
Which is, like you pointed out earlier, the worst place to have it is just a flaming zone. Right. You're walking into the zoo and the monkeys are just throwing poop left and right.
Right. That was actually when I talked with Preet, that was kind of a good thing, because I felt like I was able to kind of wrap my head around why it makes perfect sense to me why she's not a Calvinist, right? And it'd be the same thing where I had to talk to you. I think I would get at why you are a Calvinist, right? And so I think
what makes
we talked about like the kind of building these long ramps into views. Well, the discussion on the internet doesn't really allow for that, right? So there's no charity there. There's no and you're immediately looking at the person's views in a box, isolated of the reasons that they came to these positions or the experiences they had, or what, how they got to this point in their life. When you're looking at with all of your backing, and then you're looking at this like box of views, of course it's easy to straw man it and go, wow, this person's completely disingenuous, dishonest. And so it's nice to have these conversations. But where was I going with that before that though?
Do you mind if I jump on that?
No, go for it.
Yeah. So what that makes me think of is just
right.
Go ahead if you remember.
No, I was just going to say that. So seeing all those memes and everything, actually, I've seen
the robots.
and I've seen I've seen your interactions with Arminians, and I've seen your interactions with atheists, and I've seen both charitable interactions, and I've seen pretty bitter. Like immediately, you can tell that wow, there's a history here, right? And I've had people message me and say, hey, you're way too nice to that guy, or you know, watch it, that guy's slime ball or slimy or whatever. And I have kind of a bit of a policy of like, I'll let that person be that way to me first before I'm going to let somebody else's experience speak to it. I'm going to give them I'm going to be charitable to them from the start. In worst case scenario, I just, wasted a couple of hours typing or whatever. Right. But I found, like, I guess what I was saying is that, it is interesting to me to see how much animosity there is between Arminians and Calvinists equally. Like they're both really, it seems like there's a lot of, wow, your God is a monster, right? Or, hey, like your worldview is incoherent, or, back the other way. So how do you like, wait, oh shoot, I'm gonna run on for one more second here. For me, Calvinism it never dawned on me that this was, well, maybe it dawned on me, but I never took it as, it wasn't a cold, hard God that I was worshiping, right? I didn't have that problem of it being, I think because I took it all for God's glory or whatever, that ultimately this is a good story, and was able to kind of take the things that people see being the monstrous aspects. It didn't come across to me that way. And I think maybe in that field, maybe initially it did. Like maybe that's what I struggled with, just thinking out loud here. Maybe that is what gave me the hesitation of coming to it. But what's your own views, I guess, on it? Because I'm sure it's very different from how people characterize it.
Sure. I think just to give some background, I think growing up, maybe I learned about soteriology, and actually about like the Calvinist versus the free will theism controversy.
Do you want to unpack it? So soteriology, just so.
Soteriology is the subject or study of salvation. How someone is saved, what's the process where they're born again, all those things that go into that, little components. And for Calvinism, for Calvinist soteriology, God is in control of all things. He's the first mover, so to speak, in salvation. So it's not like, I give God my permission to save me. It's God saves me, and then I look back on that in awe, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like now I kind of want to do what you want me to do because you've done this great thing for me. It's that kind of perspective. And what's funny about talking about the cold God thing is that I think, I didn't learn about the Calvinist thing until like maybe I was 8 years old. And over the span of my life, I didn't really get into philosophy until I was in high school, but I started to develop subconsciously a very idealist point of view. I got really heavily into panentheism, which is like where things in the universe are actually God's thoughts. Like if I'm looking at a table, I'm looking at God's concept of a table. Started to get into things, very idealist in nature.
It's probably why you like the Aaron voluntarist.
It was very similar. And it wasn't until way later that I realized, wow, on the one hand, like whenever I would be talking within the dimension or spectrum of philosophy, I was kind of worshiping such a cold God. Here's this God who just has thoughts like a robot, and those just happen to be identical to the things in reality. Versus whenever I would be talking within the realm of theology, like here's this loving God who creates the universe and is, like Batman, like a hero who comes in and saves people at all costs. Like, that's
it's funny because people do not have a warm view of Batman.
Sure.
You just explained your whole, like your hat.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm the Calvinist Batman guy. Yeah. So I'm not really. That's not my Twitter. But yeah, I love that.
So you're saying your God was an orphan who had his parents killed. He's just bitter.
Beats up vigilantes at night. Yeah. Or not beats. He is a vigilante who beats up criminals. No, but yeah. So I kind of had this cognitive dissonance between who I was thinking of in philosophy and who I was thinking of and seeing in Scripture. And when I went to college, I went to Biola, and the biblical theology that I got down there just kind of blew apart a lot of the commitments that I had. One of the things that was sort of where I was just barely getting introduced into presuppositionalism, and this is partly why I say I'm a determinist before I was a Calvinist, because I saw that because God is determinate of all things, because I had this very God-centered view of reality, I couldn't really understand what it would mean for someone to conclude that God exists or to think about evidence without already taking God at His word.
Yeah, I saw Calvinism as a fallout of determinism. Like determinism leads to, like, it wasn't like it was it didn't go back the other way. It's a little bit like sorry, you were chatting. I'll let you go. So you're saying you learned at Biola. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I relate to that. Yeah, I mean, just to build on what you said there, like, I think the Jews had a very strong. I think the Hebrews had a very strong view of creation. I think Edwards got it right. Creation isn't like this magical event where God pushes the first domino. God is the table under all of the dominoes, holding them all up and making each one go its own way. It's much more intimate and involved. It's a God who's much more involved than just this deistic.
Yeah, he's the whole of existence, essentially.
Right. Yeah. And so with that kind of point of view, going into college with that point of view, strangely enough, that sort of led into my Reformed apologetic and led me toward people like Ventil, because once I was already committed to the idea that, God merely thinks and something is. God merely thinks and that's truth. So it just kind of dawned on me all at once, well, wait a second. If what God says is true just by Him saying it, why isn't what He says justified or justifying of belief merely as Him saying it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how can I want more than God's speech acts as justification for my beliefs in them if He's the arbiter of truth? I don't know what that would mean. And once I saw that inconsistency, I was like, oh, now I understand.
This is why you say that it's a natural application of Reformed theology, or presuppositional is an extension of Reformed theology, right?
Yeah, right. Because once you understand, like, God is in control of all things, God is sovereign, God sets the standard for everything in the universe, you realize, okay, wait a minute, like, God can't even will Himself to be dependent on sources outside Himself to create belief in you. Like, it's just there as of Him thinking it. So
yeah, and I think I wasn't funny thing is, obviously presuppositionalism was around when I was a Christian, but I didn't, like, I think Bonson was still alive.
Yeah.
And the thing is that 95 or 96 or something?
Mm-hmm. Died right after I was born, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, so do you mind me asking how old you are?
Yeah,
like
I'm
23, 24?
I'm almost 22.
22,
almost
okay.
22.
Okay. Yeah, my daughter will be 21 in December or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of it's kind of weird when you say that. If you didn't want to make me feel old earlier, you certainly just did. I got married when I was 22, and I had her when I was 23. So I was in my senior year at college when she was when I started work for DreamWorks. She was 9 months old, and I had just come right out of college.
That makes sense, because you've been working for DreamWorks what, like just over 20 years now?
Yeah, 20 years and 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago or whatever. They actually did a nice celebration for me and everything. It was really touching. Actually, I got a couple of different times where they, throughout the week, we did a night hike with the Crudes 2 group. We went up into Griffith Park in the middle of LA in the middle of the night, and they did a toast, like unexpectedly did a toast for me in the middle of the hike, probably like 20 or 30 people on the hike. And then,
Awesome.
and then just this last week, because my wife just had surgery, had a mastectomy. So she's been laid up and hadn't been out of the house. And last week, they led me down to the lagoon, taking me to, I was going to a meeting with my coordinator and one of my coworkers. And I walked out and there was like, 50 or 60 people there. And then and my wife was there too. Like they had brought her down for it or whatever.
That's so cool.
Party in the lagoon. They gave me this, this giant kind of 20th anniversary illustration. It has all the different characters laid out, and it says like 20 years of happiness or something like that. So it was really nice. Yeah, it was really cool. But anyway, it's weird. It's weird in that like my entire entire adult life is mirrored by this company. So like its history is kind of my history or whatever. So they did like the 20th anniversary because DreamWorks is 22 years old. So they.
Wow, you were there like.
Yeah, it was probably it was 22 years ago that they formed the company, but they didn't start building it out and hiring and all that. So really, I got there like.
And the CGI came later, right? Like you guys bought.
I worked actually for the CGI group. It was actually PDI was owned by DreamWorks. By the time I got there, they were half owned, and then they bought out the rest of us during Shrek. So I made Ants and Shrek actually up in the Bay Area, closer to you guys.
That's so weird to me because first of all, I'm in the Bay Area, and then second of all, I grew up like watching Ants so much.
My coordinator said that she was too. My coordinator said she was too old or too young to go see Ants in the theater.
Yes.
That made me feel pretty old.
No, I feel like, oh my gosh, here's someone like who built like a piece of my childhood right here. That's so, yeah, that's pretty cool.
So anyway, how did we get to that?
I'm 22 and your daughter is turning 21 and you're about to celebrate that, and then you were talking about.
Yeah, but you were talking about that you had, I asked you how old you were, but it was triggered off of maybe college or something like that. I don't remember. So
Bonson, because he died in '95 and I was born in '95.
Right. That's right. Oh, I was talking. I was trying to remember.
I got you off track. It was my fault.
I was trying to remember the point you were making. So presuppositionalism was around, but it was, again, without the internet. Like that's how much things have changed. Is that like you would have had to have gone out and got a book or had some type of something come through your church or something like that to expose you to it, or you would have to see it on TV or like. So I mean, I spent most of my time. A lot of my time was spent at the library. Fortunately, my wife worked at the library, so I'd have all these books out. And they'd all be overdue, and then she would just clear the debt or whatever. Like Jubilee at the library with my wife. But the thing is actually I think that I would have eventually fallen into that as well, because I think I would have I think I probably had similar thoughts in terms of it being kind of more of a whole thing, more of a kind of a big. Comprehensive understanding of God's existence impacting and filtering through all things, right? Through all states of affairs, through all matters or whatever, such that nothing's out. And so he can't, like you said, can't be dependent, can't remove himself, can't create these states that don't depend on him. And that's my view of determinism. When I left Christianity, I still a determinist, because I can't understand things apart from that.
Right.
We had. Sorry, my mind just flashed to the recent interaction I had with Trey, which ended unfortunately. I wish I hadn't done that. I was really because when I went back and read through the thread, I was like, yeah, he was being an ass, but at times he was trying to explain himself, and then I think it was just every other comment was not that, and so I think eventually he lost benefit of the doubt for me. And I could no longer see. It was like I was blind to actually seeing that occasionally he was trying to clarify. So, which just goes to show how useful civil discourse is, because you just completely talk past each other when it's not that way. You shouldn't even be conducting it at that point. So.
No, yeah, I can still relate to that. That's another part maybe that was so attractive to me was speaking of a holistic apologetic. I saw this apologetic method as very evangelical. Like, it was about people seeking to help other people for the glory of God. It wasn't about like me trying to win an argument. It wasn't about me, here's my little checklist of questions, now you fill it out. Like, it's not about that. It's about, we're human beings made in the image of God. Therefore, I should be in awe that I get to speak to this other human being with their own character, their own personality and background and stuff. It's so much more respectful to people just by making the apologetic about a lifestyle and not about, I get to feel like I won the argument now, which is like, that's the Virgin K thing.
Do you ever, there are times, and I'm just gonna be frank here, there are times where I'm reading your responses to other people, ironically, like right next to the conversation I'm having with you. So I feel like you and I are having this really, really good exchange. And then I look at the other posts around it and I'll see this like poison laced back and forth and
sure.
Not for poison laced for your part, they're more aggressive in tone. I wouldn't say that they're
sure.
Like you can get into ponage mode a little bit. It's funny because when you posted, you posted into you used to post Legal Legends. Score shot. So both my sons are like my middle son, the Spurgeon one. He used to run the League of Legends club at high school, and then they've been out to Riot a couple of times, and then both of them play aggressively. And when I'd see these posters, I'd be like, okay, that's League of Legends Jimmy coming out, right? Like that's
that's actually a very fair analysis. I think I'm a human being. I sin. I'm not perfect. I need Jesus. So with a lot of times I just lose my temper with people when I feel like they're not taking the time to listen to what I have to say. And so I'm not trying to justify it at all, but I will definitely get into a mode where it's just
I think that's fair too. I think there are people who start at level 10 with you. Like they don't come in and build, like there's definitely past history, there are past exchanges, or there's like people have maybe seen you in Hangouts and have a certain view, or potentially as well, you're taking in all the baggage that comes with Presup, right? There are so many douchebag presuppositionalists, right? Like Darwin's is such a dick, right? And so Jimmy, he's a Presup, must be a dick too.
Yeah, it's true.
And then when you go into lol mode, you potentially confirm their suspicions, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's just not good all around. And also there's a part too where it's like the comments can escalate so quickly. So like I think Floyd and me is like a good example. I have so much respect for Floyd. I think he's a great guy. He's definitely smarter than I am, like way smarter than I am. And
do you really believe that?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. I don't really think I'm that crazy smart. I know I've done a lot of reading and stuff.
I think the same way myself. Like people say things and be like, "Oh, Bert, it's obvious you're reading a lot of philosophy or whatever." I'm like, dude, I'm struggling to keep pace. Like it is.
Yeah, like I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were saying about Floyd though. I'm sorry. So.
Oh no, that's fine. Just as an example, like I have a lot of respect for Floyd, but I think maybe it can come across like you were saying, like the poison laced in the comments, just because I don't, you reach a point sometimes in the disagreement where like neither side, you reach that point of like we just have to agree to disagree, and for me and Floyd, it kind of reaches that point, but both of us are still willing to comment on each other's posts and say, this is why this is wrong, even though we've already in the past 1,000 times reached,
right,
this is where this goes, and it always reaches that point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
so you do feel, but I assume that you feel some of that you're fighting this preconception of preconceived notion of what a presuppositionalist acts like, right? Like you have the
absolutely.
So,
absolutely,
yeah, that's tough. And actually, the irony is that I face that with atheism, right? Like the guy I was chatting with yesterday on that damn video thread, the debate thread, like the guy was throwing every single like cliche stereotype at me. Like he was spouting back what Dawkins says. I said, where did I say I'd listened to Dawkins? Like, right? Or there was a point where he, it was like every single thing he wanted to pull out. He was going to like impugn like anything about me based on these other people who are supposedly like, oh, well, you disagree with this person then. Okay, great. I disagree with them then.
Hey, look, there's no shortage of assholes in the Christian side of. We have Nephilim free, all right? If there's proof the devil exists, like, there it is, okay? I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I was going to say, so the interesting thing is that, like, I think you'll get you'll get not a fair shake from me, but you don't have to build as much of a ramp with me. Like when you're talking about presup, right? Like the presuppositionalist approach, I get it. Like I understand where it's coming from, right? And why it makes sense to you. But I think the hard part about it is that you're presupposing a foundation that you've come to through this long road of beliefs that eventually led you to this conclusion, right?
Sure,
about how this makes sense, right? And then you're going, okay, this is now a presupposition, right? So to some degree, you have reasons by which you came to believe that this is the case, right? But
sure,
people aren't coming to it with those reasons, right? And so to some degree, it looks like a dick move or like a lot to ask to go, hey, this is true until proven false, or this is you need to, based on how I've built out this understanding of the whole of existence and God's role in it, I see clearly you're standing on the very ground you're arguing against, right? Like you can't make the argument without the whole, right? But you've come to the whole, you've come to that belief through this kind of, through this long road of 22 years, did you say, of life yeah. And so I think that's part of the reason why it is a lot to, like, it is a bold claim. Like I think it's the boldest of claims.
Absolutely, yeah.
But as well, it's one being made without, with nobody else having that ramp that you've built. And I think the trouble is when you're asked to justify it, they don't get the ramp. Instead, what they get is, well, tell me how your worldview does it, right? And that immediately feels like a burden shifter. It feels like, wait, how is that going to justify your belief, right? How is that going to? It was funny because earlier this week, and I've actually, so that Scratchpad hangout that you had, the supping with pre-suppers, I've probably watched. It's entertaining dialogue. Interestingly, I think it was nice to have so many people, including yourself, who were willing to go into a depth that you don't see normally. Like I think you actually, it's funny because now I think probably 8 months ago, whenever it aired, or maybe it was, I think maybe Noah's thing was like it's like a year ago almost, the Durban video. And then I think like late last year, I think it was like 3 months after, whatever, you guys did that hangout. And the thing is that actually I just enjoy the level of discourse that was occurring there. I wish we could have those hangouts all the time. Like it's where everybody's just kind of letting everybody speak, and there's generally and the and there's there's kind of this kind of back and forth and kind of unpacking and re-examining and kind of and poking at on both sides. It'd be nice if there were more of those, but but I think sorry, go ahead.
Can I interrupt you right there?
Yeah.
Okay. Just because I think that is one reason why we connected so quickly, was because I care about what the other person believes. I'm not. I know I can come across as a very argumentative person. Like I have that whole that personality that is so easy to stereotype.
You're black and white. Your black and white imagery and like you have the whole thing going on.
Yes, absolutely, and I totally admit it. But like, but because of that, so there's this very easy stereotype that can exist, and I admit it. I can totally come across that way. But it annoys me when somebody is conversing with me and they want to get a cheap shot, or they're treating me like I want to get a cheap shot. And I think right off the bat, like, both of us care about other people and their beliefs, and not about like basically playing semantic games. It's like, so I think that that's sort of that's the goal of these conversations you're talking about. Is people come, they unpack what they believe. And then from there, we can have respectful challenging of one person to another. But it's not just this contest to see how many witticisms you can get off of somebody else's commitments. Like, that's just stupid.
Yeah, I save those for the videos. It is true to a degree. Although originally when I started doing them, I saw them more as a way to get to a topic that it was a little bit. Some of those videos that I've made, the person that I'm taking shots at is clickbait, essentially, because I want to talk about an issue or whatever. And ironically, the unfortunate thing is that people only watch the ponage videos. Like one of the most underwatched, I think the most underwatched videos on my thing are the Hangouts where we're actually trying to get at something really difficult, right? Like two dogmas, right? Or like Frege's sense and reference or something. I think those or even the theologically, I thought my videos on God were actually going to play better, like get more views. But actually, people really want to see me talk about somebody's views on God's and why that person's wrong, right? Or like the Hangout I did with Trey has like 1,400 views, whereas something that I'll spend like 3 or 4 weeks on and actually try to put good content into a little bite with some entertaining visuals will get like 300 views or 400 views, right? Or something like that. So
I may come off here as really contemptuous, but I mean, you can't be surprised by that now, Bert. I mean, think of all the Christians who like are just, they have a Craig fetish. They're over there like watching Craig prove to me the atheist is wrong. Prove to me the atheist is wrong. That's all they care about. Like, and no time spent in serious biblical exegesis or theology. Is it any wonder like we have so many people reading the?
we were talking about I'm going to throw the link out pretty soon just to have more people chatting in here. But we were talking about, if that's okay with you.
Go for it. Yeah.
We were talking about the excerpts that I did on the Hangouts on the early Bubble Hangouts, and it was mainly because it was interesting. Those early ones ended up with these great little chunks. Like there were discrete like 20 minutes. It's harder. I've tried to go back and do that for some of the more recent ones, but the conversation's kind of all over the place. So it would really be like carving out like an hour of conversation versus like 15 minutes on neutral monism or 15 minutes on idealism or something, right?
It's like that 1,000 words per second Max video where he's like, with Max Slick.
Right, yeah. But the thing is that like we were saying beforehand, it'd be great to have. It's like I watch Darwin's Greatest Hits because it cracks me up, right? Like when he flips out, there's nothing better in my day. Like it just starts it off so well. But but it would be nice to have a channel that wasn't Darwin's Greatest Hits, but actually was the segments. We talked about this beforehand, but I want to air it for the
please do
for the people that it'd be great to actually have a channel that grabbed the good bits out of these Hangouts. And actually Darwin's Greatest Hits does sometimes, like they actually like that person will put on, whoever that person is, that mystery person, will put like good little bites, usually it's associated with something somebody said that's laughable, but then like expound on it a bit. Like there are some philosophical nuggets on there, but it would actually be nice to get more of the quality chunks broken out and actually on a channel or whatever. So maybe I'll do more of that. As I said, I did that with Ozzy's speech acts, where I grabbed that portion out.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more of those that we can kind of get out. I think you had mentioned one where Jack Angstrike was going over something.
Oh, that was in. I like not only I love those excerpts. Like I think the one I've watched maybe like 3 times now is Mariology. It was the Mariology one actually with you and Xbox. I've probably watched that 3 times now.
Oh, right,
right. You're talking about the Hell in a Handbasket video, which I really appreciated all the timestamps in it. I wish.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I wish more videos would use those. It makes it so much easier to navigate. Like I love, coming back and now in case I want to use something in that video, I can go download it and skip right to the part and it's right there, for reference sake. I just think it's really, really great.
Cool. Let me throw out this. I'm assuming I'm going to have some people that are interested in coming in, but if people can keep it civil as well. I assume so. But
did you?
J.D. Kane, fresh back from his honeymoon. So.
Oh dang! I didn't know. I thought J.D. Kane was married.
Yeah. Hey, give me a moment. I want to get my camera on. 1 second.
And here's Max. Maximus was pinging me earlier.
What's up, Sir Max? Good to see you. I haven't talked to you forever. Oh, hey, Frank.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't get further down the road on. We talked so much about. I actually was hoping to like split it half and half to talk about epistemology or get into kind of your argument, but we can certainly do that here. But there's been plenty of that conversation, so it was interesting to hear about your how your faith acts for you. Actually, do you mind me asking you about your prayer life, or like what? It's something that I don't get to talk to many Christians about. So what are your prayer habits like, I guess?
It's funny. I don't know. I feel bad because I don't want to discredit believers. Just because you're in other words, just to get this out of the way, just because you're a Calvinist doesn't mean you pray more. But I remember watching a video where you were talking about looking at life's little lessons, because you were a Christian determinist basically, and I would say my prayer life is very much like that. I can I look around and I see creation, God doing things, and so it's like I said earlier, it's like having a conversation with Jesus all the time. I mean, even as we're having this conversation, there are thoughts in my head at this or that point, like, oh, like, God, I'm so thankful for this, or I can see that obviously you're using this to do that, or at least that's my perspective. Something that I thought was really brilliant, that one of my really good friends, a close friend from church, showed me last year is praying from the Psalms. And I don't know why I hadn't run across that earlier in my life, but it's just, looking at the Psalms maybe for like an hour and reading along with them, because they're poetry and they usually go with music, and applying what is the word? Associating with the theological truths that are found therein. So, like, if it says, Lord, your majesty is found throughout all the earth, then I would be, I would meditate on that and think about the vast array of experiences in my life where I've seen God's glory come about through things that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a huge topic. I'm kind of a big picture person, so tell me if I'm leaving out details.
Well, do you have periods during the week where you spend time doing that? So or like what, I guess, like in terms of how you live your life and I don't know that people who haven't had that experience, that they know kind of what that, we just see you with the camera on all the time. We don't know what how your faith is a living faith and what is active in your life. And so I find that kind of interesting to hear about, as well as just because it resonates with my past experience. So it's always curious to me to hear how it is for someone else or whatever.
Yeah.
Find out what I missed out on. Tell me what my friends were going through.
Tell me what your friends, the real,
what was the real faith like?
Well, I'm not sure that, I'm not sure I would say that. I don't think.
I'm just joking. It's fine.
Sure. but yeah, weekly. Oh man, I am not a very disciplined person. Deidre's not here, but she would tease me about being in the Myers-Briggs P category right off the bat. Like I do not like routine of any sort. So my life is really messy all the time, just in terms of my schedule. And there's not really like a prayer. There's not really like a set principle I have or time for prayer. I try to read scripture in the morning. Right now I'm reading the Gospel of Matthew. I came across your why not inerrancy video just like, I think it was just this morning actually. It was either yesterday morning or this morning, and I'm reading the Gospel of Matthew. I'm thinking about that stuff.
It was the birth one now.
Yeah, the birth story. Yeah. And so like I'll pray as I'm reading things, and it's hard to describe because it's very much like for somebody who's not a believer, it's very much like thinking there's another person in the room with you all the time. Like wherever I go, there's just God's with you all the time. Yeah. It's like, and it's also it's very much like romance. Like when you're with when you're with your loved one, like there's kind of like an assumed relatability. Like everything that's about you now has to do with them, and everything that's going on in their life, you automatically want to know about it. You want to be a part of it, and you want to appreciate what makes them tick and all that's going on. It's very much like that. You're taken with them. You're what's the word I'm looking here? You're smitten with that person.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Hey everybody. Did anybody want to chime in?
No.
No. Okay. Cool.
I was thinking of just listing like I don't know, Doug Wilson, James White, and Douglas and MacArthur, and asking Jimmy who would he want to kill, who he would, or maybe excommunicate. Or the other one is work under, and the other is have one Bible study. Like just making a very tame version of that.
Max is speaking from inside a Hercules transport plane, by the way.
Yeah, Max and Cliff, you guys are a little low.
All right, is the problem still present?
You've got the buzz. You got the buzz, but you sound a little better. So go for it.
Are you on a laptop on top of some power lines?
Yeah, seriously, right? You can hear those.
All right, it went away. Now it's back.
Oh.
You got like a low-level hum going on.
Yeah, now.
Are you epilating right now? I was like,
that's what it sounded like.
I hope it's the face. I really hope it's the face.
Is it coming in clear?
Now it sounds like you're in a giant room.
Okay, I'm in a giant room right now. I just took off the headphones.
All right, well, we lost the hum. So.
Yeah, go for it. We're good. Go for it.
Okay. Excommunicate, Bible study, and apprentice.
Question, because I know you'll spell out the challenge here, Max. But just for the Bible study, can I decide what the topic is?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead.
Can I just say that? Can I say this version, this Christian version of kill, marry, fuck is horrible. This is just, I'm sad here. I'm literally, tears are starting to come out. Excommunicate or Bible study, or maybe we'll talk about flowers. Like, oh my God.
Yes. Although in some circles, excommunicate is worse than kill.
Okay, so who's the person? You're going to list a person now.
Oh yeah, I was going to list Doug Wilson, James White, and Douglas MacArthur. I believe that's his name.
John MacArthur.
John MacArthur. Not the World War II admiral.
Not that guy.
The general. World War II general.
Right.
He's a big pre-supper, that one.
So make your choice, Jimmy.
Okay, so I would excommunicate Doug Wilson. I love Doug Wilson, but or at least what very little I've heard from him. But I don't know him that well, so I would be the most comfortable if I have to just do without him. That would be Doug Wilson. I would want to work under James White, and I would want to have a Bible study with John MacArthur, as long as it's not on his dispensationalism. As long as we're not doing how he thinks Israel is separate from the church. Awesome.
All right, let's use those same names, and we're going to do kill, marry, fuck, and we'll see how that goes.
Well, I was going to say, actually, if you asked one of the atheists that question, the funny thing is the excommunicate becomes like somebody you're going to be hanging around with or whatever. So, like James White, you and I would agree we would not excommunicate James White.
To be fair, Doug Wilson also holds to things Jimmy I know disagrees with. He holds to paedo-baptism, and he holds to. He's also a post-millennialist. And what else would you guys disagree with? Well, I mean, I disagree with this, and I think most people would. But Doug is also kind of an apologist for Southern slavery, and I'm being very charitable when I say kind of. Like he doesn't. He's not
he argues he argues that there are biblical, like he says they would have done it better if they had followed the Bible's guidelines.
That is actually his position.
Yeah, that's I heard him.
It wasn't slavery wasn't biblical enough.
Yeah, basically, he says that Southern slavery was wrong because they didn't follow the biblical guidelines. But there's nothing inherently wrong with slavery.
He said because in the Bible we never would have separated families or raped slave women, which.
Wait, hold on a second. That doesn't make sense because within the very first few laws in Exodus about slaves, a slave owner is allowed to give his male slave a wife, and then when the time comes that the male slave can leave, he can leave the wife that he had as a slave. So I don't think that's.
Well, the slave owner wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, that's Exodus 21.
I guess the slave owner isn't the one separating the family, so I guess that still fits.
Let me PM Floyd to get him in here. Hold on.
Floyd, the resident atheist Bible expert.
The resident.
Well, that's happening. Can I ask you a question, Jimmy?
Of course, go for it.
Do you think that the Seidenbruggen cane has effectively poisoned the well for honest pre-suppers? That so when you say you're a pre-supper, my natural inclination is to say, oh, you're one of those dishonest, shut down the discussion, shut atheist mouths, assholes.
Oh yeah, what's your opinion of the cyclone version of the pre-supper?
Do you agree with assholes?
No,
how much do they have right and how much do they have wrong? That's a better way of putting it.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a really good question. I don't think Sai is very faithful to Van Til and the entire Reformed approach to apologetics at all. I think maybe he has the whole God is not in the docs, quote unquote. I would give him that maybe. Maybe he has that doctrinally right, but as soon as he engages people, he's just rude and he harasses people, and I don't think that's. I mean, how many times does Jesus even feel the need to bring up a debate about God? Like, very, very rarely.
Mostly with kind of. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say mostly with the Pharisees, and it was usually about more complex moral theological doctrine than about the existence. The existence of God never comes up with Jesus. Like,
furthermore, when it comes to how Jesus debates Sadducees, who have far less in common to him than the Pharisees, sometimes he actually goes with pure philosophical responses and defenses. So, for example, when the Sadducees bring up the law of Moses, says that if one brother doesn't produce an offspring with his wife, then the other brother can produce his offspring. And if he dies, then another and another and another. Let's say the seventh one has one, and the resurrection day happens. Whose son is he? And Jesus doesn't go to the law of Moses and find a contradictory passage. He says, no, there's a problem in your logic. You're assuming that in heaven we're still going to be married. That's not the case. He essentially clears up a false assumption. He doesn't say, oh, well, without the other books of the Old Testament or of the Torah, you don't know how to ground your worldview.
it's a reductio, right? Like,
Exactly.
Proverbs. What is that proverb where a dog returns to its own vomit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also mentioned in the New
Oh, the
Testament.
classic dog vomit. Probably, yes.
Yeah, classic dog vomit. But yeah, no, I think maybe 99%, like, Satan is not really faithful to the Reformed apologetic. Yeah.
Funnily enough, that kind of leads into another question that sort of popped in my head. I write down things. And it was when you were saying about sort of people watch these William Lane Craig videos and they're like, oh, look, you see, you're proving the atheist wrong, and for me, whenever I read those kinds of comments, it suggests to me that these are the kind of people who are really uncomfortable being exposed to atheist arguments. It's like, oh yeah, that's really good. No, I don't want that to be a proper argument, so I'm just going to find a way for it not to be the case. They effectively they want to believe more than they want to consider. The ideas, and I think Satan is an example of that. If you look at his way of doing things, it's like, I'm going to point my finger and make you justify your position, because then you can't be asking me about, what about this bit in Leviticus, or what about this bit here, and what about that bit there, and what about that bit there, all these contradictions or, moral arguments. It's, oh, I don't do Bible studies with atheists. It's a way of shutting it down, and I think that is because it would expose that he doesn't know the Bible very well.
I don't really understand that. Perhaps that is what I find most just terrible, overall terrible. Like, how can you not want to share biblical exegesis with unbelievers like that? That's just, I mean, honestly, it's retarded. That is the Christian message: is God has spoken, and God has spoken through His Son, and it's a message of grace and redemption for everyone who repents. We're supposed to be the ones who are carrying that message, but you're going to tell unbelievers, like, no, I'm unwilling to share any of the details with you. That's, I don't have words for that.
Well, that's actually one of the issues I have with presuppositionalism in general, is that it's just from a practical standpoint, it's more than ineffective. It's kind of detrimental to the message. You could, let's say you're talking to someone and you're giving them Bible quotes, and they're listening. They're not particularly hard on their beliefs aren't very thought out, and so they're like, oh, well, that's good teaching by Jesus, and maybe I should do this. But then they ask a question that starts the presup script, and once you start going down that line, like how everyone I've ever talked to, told this to, whether they're into religion or not, are immediately like, that just sounds terrible. It's all and they start moving away from anything else you've said. And so it seems like it's going the opposite direction that you want. Like, if you want to give people a message and see them convert and join Christ. And yet this other argument that you adhere to kind of pushes them the other way.
It's sort of like they're saying, even Christianity, this is what's happening. But so are you going to take Christianity? It's like, well, why should I? Oh, because you can't think, therefore you should take on Christianity. But I can't think, therefore I shouldn't take on Christianity because I can't think.
Yeah, so, I'm making a slightly different point, but yeah, if you can, Jimmy.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion. Like, a lot of it is like Saiton Brinke, I feel bad for picking on him, but it's such a good example. Like, he has such an idiosyncratic language unwittingly. Like, he doesn't realize, dude, you're using these words with so much baggage that you invest in them, but you don't unpack any of that for the listener. And then you just expect people to intuit exactly what you mean. Like, for example, when he says absolute certainty, like, okay, someone who's intelligent is probably going to think that you're talking about like a psychological state of confidence. But what you really mean, I think, is an infallibilist model of knowledge. Like, you're talking about a certain theory of justification, not confidence, which is probably what 99% of your audience thinks you're talking about. So that's sort of to you, Frank. With the whole precept text, like, as soon as I hear that, it's like, that to me is like cyclonism. That to me is like Eric Hovind and those guys. Like, that's not really presuppositionalism, because Van Til and that whole tradition never was about this, oh, I have this unstoppable grocery list, and as soon as I go down the list of items, like, you'll be destroyed and I'll win the argument. Like, that's not what it's about at all.
Yeah, it's it's like, how do you know that? How can you be certain? And the response I usually give is, well, in what way is certainty an ingredient in knowledge? What does it matter how confident I am? And that's usually, things just fall apart there, because they mean what I hate to bring it up, but what Darwin's deity has been saying recently, which is, know something in such a way that you can't be wrong. But of course, I think the bigger issue of that is that you end up with an infinite regress of, well, how do I know I'm not wrong about that? And so eventually you terminate something that you can't quite justify.
But the problem with Darwin's deity, or Matt Slick for that matter, is it ends up going to this circle where he just has to plain assert it. He has to say, God said so. It's almost like, you can't be certain, you can't be certain, you can't be certain, but I can be certain because God. Well, that's a God of the gaps argument, which is, it's the, the Bible said God knows everything. God is omnipotent and omniscient, so therefore he's omnipotent and omniscient and did everything, and so that proves God's right. Then,
epistemology is its own field that has posed these points before, and there is no model that goes unchallenged. Now, this isn't to say you shouldn't pick or settle on a model. There are people who do take on the Cartesian project. Lawrence Mangeur, whose textbook we're reading in our epistemology class, is actually a rationalist who believes that we just intuit necessary facts about the world itself, and that kind of serves as our foundation of knowledge. So it's not completely unheard of, no. But the point is, if you're going to come on here and discuss these ideas, you have to at least be knowledgeable of the area, and not just, blurt shit out and claim you have firm defeaters. Cough, cough, Darwin. Cough, cough.
Hey, Jimmy, what do you think of Matt Slick's version of tag? Because it's gone through a lot of crap lately.
And yet he rolled it out the other day again.
Yeah, I was rolling when I felt like, Jesus, he hasn't learned a thing. Well, maybe you have a different view. Anyway, what do you think, Jimmy? Assuming you've kept up with Alex's discussions and then the further talks on that.
I came across Dave S's video on that the other day. So I'm kind of like recent to the. I'm not privy to the entire dialectic, but just in general with formalization, I think you have to be very careful. My personal views on that are that Western society tends to think of arguments as sort of these universal images that sort of give you a view into the world or into a conclusion or whatever it is. And anybody can come across them and figure out what they mean. Anybody can come across them and follow the premises to the conclusion, but that's not really how arguments work. Like, arguments are very, very contextual. If you don't have the right background, if you don't have the right history, you're not really going to understand it. You might interpret some of the things completely differently. So I don't think formal arguments are all that useful, or at least they're not as useful as people make them out to be. In my opinion, I would use something like Matt Slick's argument to show that there is an epistemological antithesis between the believer and the unbeliever. But I wouldn't try to argue that God exists using some kind of formalized pattern. I don't think it's useful.
So when you say antithesis, in terms of serving as a dialectic, what you mean to say is the Christian worldview of there are these things that exist, they're transcendentals, and the Christian worldview goes about in grounding and understanding them through the mind of God. Tell me how you understand him, and we can dialogue about it and see whatever we pull out of it. Is that what you're kind of approaching here?
That's exactly it. Yeah, okay. I don't want to start the. I think we're starting off on the wrong foot if we say, "Aha! I have the argument for God's existence, and here it is, premise one, premise two." Like that's already getting the wrong foot off the table. I would much rather have a discussion with the person, see what makes them tick, and say, "Look, I believe that this Bible and the view that it purports gives us the basis for rationality, gives us the basis for thinking all these things that we do, going about life, and it's Libben's philosophy. Like it's a life philosophy, and then challenging that person in the same way that I would challenge someone to repent. Like it's the gospel. Like we're sinners. We need Jesus, so we repent of our sin and we turn to Jesus. In the same, it's no different for epistemology. Look, we're all sinners. We all have an idolatrous epistemology that we use to substitute God's revelation. We need to recant that. We need to repent that and turn back to, the revelation.
What if you've never had a revelation?
But tag is like the number one argument used by pre-suppers. Like, what do you think of his formulation of it compared to the ones that maybe you would use?
Maybe it would help if we just kind of quickly ran down the problems we found with it. Or I should say Alex found with it, we all kind of jumped on. Would that help?
That's right.
Go ahead.
I can do a short version of it.
Well,
Sure, go ahead, Bert.
That's fine. Go ahead. I'll let you unpack it first, and then.
Yeah. This is the short. Yeah.
JD, I'm so sorry. Can I run to the bathroom really quick?
No.
I've been drinking coffee like.
JD, will you give him
like
his
a mad person?
This is why I have the coffee cup. I'm not always drinking coffee.
Are you guys?
But you were smart, and I wasn't. I've been sitting here just like. Over here
just get a glass soapy bottle and set it next to your computer, and you'll be all right.
Yeah, you should do what JD does. Pee into your coffee mug while you're sitting there talking to us.
I will be.
Hope you remember when you've done that.
Just always remember though.
Let's just keep talking about it.
Yeah.
If
you take this approach, ensure that you mute your mic, otherwise you just hear the dripping noise.
I'm trying to think of the shortest way to go through the problems with it. Like, terms
there's
instead
no
of
problem. You get up, you go to the bathroom, watch your. Oh, my bad. Sorry. Go ahead.
Jimmy's laying down a disjunctive syllogism right now.
It's horrible, and I'm still laughing. Oh, damn it.
Continue. Sorry.
Wait till it gets back. Or we need Ozzy. Ozzy, if you're still watching, come in the room and give us your version of it, and then about midnight tonight, we'll finally hear Jimmy's response.
Are you guys familiar with John Frame's formulation of the transcendental argument?
I am not.
I fell asleep while you were saying that.
I'm familiar with your mom's formulation of the transcendental argument.
It's actually very rigorous, your mother's. If we can get your mom into this room. And
Max's mom is no starfish.
What?
Just put it out there.
You know?
just starfish.
You just took that opening for your mama joke and you just grabbed it by the pussy, didn't you?
I just grabbed it by the...
Speaking of Trump, how many people are still shocked by how quickly evangelicals, I don't know if Jimmy's probably not even one of them, how many evangelicals who previously would say I would never vote for an atheist or anything like that, they're the worst people in the world, are now happily going to vote for one. Like, well, that's secondary now.
Well, I don't know that I don't think they're going to vote. Well, you're talking about voting for Trump? So you're talking about, I thought you were talking about they were going to ban it and vote for Hillary.
No, well, they're both. I'm pretty sure they're both atheists. I mean, Hillary will probably go do like 12 focus groups. Like, they want me to be Protestant. Okay, I just went to my Protestant church the other day. Trump, on the other hand, it's kind of obvious. I think not a religious guy at all. And yet, he seems to have an awful lot of evangelical support. All right, sorry, Jimmy, we ran over to politics for a sec while you were gone.
Oh, I think the Dave S video is pretty exhaustive, and I think the main point is the positing of the proposition and its negation as the disjunctive syllogism, right? Like that's the fundamental problem.
That was one of the big ones.
Right. I think that's really the one you only have to go after, because I think that just takes it off the table for his formulation anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the first one, he uses terms instead of propositions. God or not God, that's not how it's supposed to work. It's a false dichotomy, which you unpack it. Even though when you're charitable, it's not a true dichotomy. And then, yeah, that if you formulate it correctly, if you use a disjunctive syllogism where the first premise is a thing in its negation, the result is a tautology. You're just saying X, therefore X. And so his formulation doesn't tell you, there's no information. It's I guess you could say it has no truth value. Just like this, therefore this. Well, duh, but you haven't really given us any information yet.
Okay, so yeah, I don't think, actually, Brett, I think you really nailed it. Like, if you have premise one, I don't think it's really an issue. Like most of the, or I should say most. A lot of what I've seen of Malpass and I don't know Dave S as well, but that whole interaction seems to be a lot of critiquing of semantics and formality rather than the actual content of the argument. So the content of the argument I just think is simple. Like it's just stating that there's an antithesis between Christian theism and non-Christian theism. That what Slick called a true dichotomy, and that the Christian theistic system, or I should say, the non-Christian theistic system reduces to absurdity. So you're only left with the Christian theistic system at that point, right? But if the person denies the antithesis, then absolutely the argument doesn't get off the ground.
How does the non-Christian theistic system reduce to absurdity?
Well, it depends on what the person's beliefs are, right? But in general, the problem has been to demonstrate how, for example, how you can exist, or what it means to talk about knowledge, or to have knowledge.
I don't see how that
invoking
for a non-Christian system.
What?
Sure. I mean, what would you?
Like, I'm just looking at it from my religious perspective, because I have a non-Christian theistic system, it's polytheism, and
sure,
I don't see how existence is an issue, or knowledge is an issue.
Well, okay. So, for example, what do you think of the classical Christian responses to polytheism, say from or Thomas Aquinas or something?
I don't know what Thomas Aquinas said about polytheism, honestly.
I believe I'm not sure if Augustine and Aquinas' approaches, but there is actually a monotheist who works in the Muslim tradition, but it could be appropriated for Christianity quite well. His name is Avicenna, and he would argue that imagine that there were multiple necessary beings. Now, if these necessary beings all have their particular traits, like their differences between one another, then those different properties, the ones that distinguish one another, then those properties would be contingent upon something else. And if they are, then there's at least one other being who is more supreme over those ones, because they're relying on them for their sustained existence between those properties. So if you narrow it down, then it's ultimately going to come down to one being who doesn't have these diverse qualities to them, but is a pure, simple being. That's something out of the classical theistic tradition. So it's kind of like Platonism, wherein you have these material God beings who exist on one realm of reality, but then you have this pure being called the One who sustains all of contingent reality upon itself.
I get a divine simplicity
that solves that problem.
I'm sorry?
In polytheism, general, like, in a lot of people borrow from the Greek polytheist setup with chaos kind of solving that problem. So again, like existence isn't really an issue because you have something that functionally solves for that issue.
But
as far as existence is concerned,
really quick. There's sort of two ways you could go with this. We can. I'm happy to discuss polytheism and why I don't think, for example, chaos or fate works as a metaphysical principle. But suffice it to say, just to answer the earlier question about non-Christian theism, I don't believe that in history there has been a worldview that has been consistent or coherent in trying to defend the possibility of not invoking the Christian God. And when I say I don't think it's come up in history, that's not just a statement of nobody's done it yet. It's a statement that, in principle, you see manifestations of this impossibility throughout history. Like, nobody has been able to do it, and for good reason, because it can't be done.
Wait.
I just disagree with that. I don't know how you're like. I see that you're making the assertion, but I don't. Like, you're saying that it's logically impossible to have polytheism. Almost, it seems like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, sure.
Like, what's the thing that it can't be reconciled with polytheism? It's like, if you can reconcile it with one God, why can't you reconcile it with many?
Well, okay, so in the case of what Max is referring to, the concept of aseity, or the concept of independence, is irreconcilable on polytheism. So if you don't have a being,
because if we're defining, it depends on how you're defining a God, I guess. Because I think that, like, there are a variety of definitions on what God is from the polytheist perspective. I take that the gods are immaterial. So if you're talking about material gods and then having the criticism come at polytheism strictly from the material god standpoint, I might agree with you. But
he was talking about aseity, though.
Right.
I don't necessarily understand what that is. Can someone define it for me?
Yeah, it's well, I just double-checked to see that I knew it. It refers to the property by which a being exists in and of itself, from itself, or exists as so and such of and from itself.
Doesn't chaos work with that?
No,
chaos is supposed to be the primordial state, like the state of nothingness, almost.
Oh, actually, if you look at even Greek tradition, chaos was something that took on the form. And if you look at Plato, he said, look, if matter is something which has no form on its own, if it's purely chaotic, then obviously we need, kind of, I'm not sure what word he used. We need something like a divine source or being that pushes those two things together. Or Aristotle, who said, look, if we're going to just have chaos, something that's constantly taking on form, then there has to be an end or reason why it keeps taking form, and of course that's ultimately going to pan down to God. That
can't just be the nature of chaos, that it constantly shifts and takes on form?
Was that the problem?
Because
that's the nature of the creator, is that he creates things. So I mean, if you're going to say there has to be a reason for chaos taking on form, you're going to have to talk about a reason why God decided, I want to create things today.
Oh, all right. So the answer to that would be very simple. Chaos, by its very nature, isn't set to take on one form or another. So we wouldn't expect to see any kind of regularity going into that, by even the very nature of what the proponent would argue. Now, on the other hand, God in Aristotle's cosmology is a mover in the sense that, not in the sense that he's actively willing chaos to go into form or matter, but because he's the highest being, chaos and form are going to harmonize because they're trying to emulate this divine being. So,
can I respond?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm still trying to digest what you said, but sorry, go ahead, Timmy or Jimmy.
Let me. That's fine. Let me see if I can give a more succinct response. What I would say is I think aseity and immutability entail each other. They're logically codependent, so you can't have one without the other. So as soon as you say chaos is self-existent, or it bears the property of aseity, and then you also say it changes, that's problematic. You can't have a being that changes that is also a se, or self-existent, because then it becomes that the being is partially what it could be and partially what it actually is. And if the being is divided into parts, which one of those is actually in line with that being? That is, is that property of what the thing actually is better, or is it what it will be better, or what it's heading towards?
I don't think that better is something that needs to be worked into the equation with chaos. Chaos doesn't claim to be some kind of perfect, immutable thing. It's
the connotations of the words
it is the status of default. Like if the universe goes away, you go back to chaos. That's
right.
That's
I'm asking you a question about directionality. Not it's not a qualitative statement. It is a qualitative statement, but it's not a statement about...
1 second. I'd also ask on top of that, how liberally are you defining change? Because you have a God that thinks and creates things and talks. Like it's changing when it moves, or it's changing when it talks, or it does an act of creation. That's a change that your immutable God is doing. So how liberally are you defining unchanging?
What I would say is a change is you can say that something has a state that wasn't always the case for that thing. So if I could say
God in the moment of creation is different from the moment of not creation.
Not really. So there's actually a distinction between real properties and Cambridge properties. So, for example, a real property of Socrates is that he's a biped, he's a two-legged creature or being. Now, or that he's 6'5". Let's go with that. So if you were to cut the legs off of Socrates, that's a real change within him. But let's say we have a world that suddenly everybody shrinks down and everyone is under 6'5". Socrates doesn't go under any real change, but he suddenly gains the property of being the tallest man in the world. Not because of any real change that happened, but because of a Cambridge change around everything else.
I don't think that applies to my criticism of God, because when he's creating something, that is him making a change. Like he's actually doing something.
No, creation is coming into existence. God is staying as he is.
So God doesn't cause creation? He's not the creator?
He's not in the same sense we would do it. It'd be better to say he sustains creation.
Mind blown. What? God's not the creator anymore?
Wait, Bert, what word are you going to say?
The Bible lying when it says God created the heavens and the earth?
Create is being used in sense.
That's okay. I was going to say that I understand, like when Max is talking about the 6'5" example, right? Like that's how my priest or my Reformed theology friends explained it to me. That I think actually is what I actually think that's what Trey Jadlow is trying to get across, but doesn't know enough to actually communicate it. Is that it's the attenuation based on our proximity to God, right? Like so, God doesn't love more or less. God is constant, and the attenuation is something we experience because of our proximity, right? But the thing is that I think that there's that breaks. I would like to hear your explanation to Ocean's point of how an act of bringing things into being, how that fits in that scheme or that understanding. And also, just as a side note, Ozzy had asked why is it that what reason is there that aseity implies immutability?
That's essentially what I'm asking with counterexamples.
Right.
Why is that assertion there? I don't see a reason why it needs to be.
Why couldn't you have aseity with a changing state? So
I'll let Jimmy handle this because I don't want to hog all this.
That's fine. No, I don't mind I think I'm not a scholastic realist, so some of my answers will be a little bit different. But and I'm actually not sure if you're in scholastic realist.
I go back and forth at times, but so one way to imagine this is kind of like if we think of the universe as a four-dimensional space block where past, present, future exist in simultaneity, then creation is something we label to God in His sustaining. So at time t1, God is sustaining, just as he is in time t2 and time t3 and time so on and so forth. But creation is a relationship between cause and effect, whereas sustaining explains how that relationship is working.
So let me give a counter. Can I
just get one clarification? Can I get one clarification, Max? Are you saying that we and God are both in a B-time block, essentially?
No, God is outside of the block. God is not a temporal agent, but he sustains time and existence in that part of the dimension in creation.
Is there any time where God did God have a potential to be a creator, or was God always a creator?
Always refers to, as I understand it, an in-time relation. So when we talk about God's passive potency versus active potency, and this is a bit of scholastic jargon thrown in here, God always maintains the power of creation in his own being, yet what is active in creation is always going to be different. So a good way of forming it is like with the difference of passive will and active will. So when I'm drawing a triangle, I am actively drawing a triangle, but I'm passively opting not to draw a circle or a square or a rectangle or any kind of contrary form, not because I don't have that ability, but because I'm just passing on it as I'm doing what I am doing.
So let me give a counter perspective, because I don't believe in the Thomism, the essentialist Thomism.
Okay.
So I respect a lot of what Thomas did with respect to divine theological predication and trying to create a system for analogy between attributing acts to God and attributing acts to creatures. But I don't think that he was successful. But what I do think is successful is the concept of condescension. I think that God can change, but God's changing is from the fact that he chooses to enter creation. So, in other words, in God's creating the universe, he is not eternally in one state with respect to all of those events without any kind of qualification. God also chooses to be a part of the creation. In the same way that if I write a fantasy novel and I choose to make myself one of the imaginative characters in that novel, even though I take on a bunch of imaginative properties in the story, I, as the author outside of the story, have none of those properties, and am completely devoid of any kind of dependence on the story that I'm telling. So in the same way, I would say, yeah, God does change, but only as a character in the story, not the God who is beyond it.
Wait,
is there a distinction between those two entities? Because it seems to me that if God maintains any sort of qualities between those two interpretations of his character, then we have a problematic character that's interacting with us on this realm, right? Morally, he's got access to all this information. He exists outside of the realm, and so our decision-making processes and the changes that are occurring here are already known to him in all of its in every detail, right?
Right. So the big problem with one of the big problems with neo-orthodoxy and with the theologian Karl Barth was that he wanted to say something very much like this: that the only God we can get in contact with, the Christian God, is through his Son. There's no way to talk about God as he precedes creation. There's just no way to
God's beyond understanding, essentially, right?
Right. He's incomprehensible.
Right.
For the Reformed Christian, we agree to the doctrine of incomprehensibility with the caveat that God preceding creation. Sure. What that means is that God preceding creation can be known as he voluntarily chooses to reveal himself by taking on creaturely properties, by stepping into time and taking on covenantal or created properties.
I still don't see why you can't apply this stuff to chaos.
Would you?
Sounds like God's just manifesting himself in some weird way. Like it's
right.
What's
it's
the difference?
Like, okay, so it may be a cube, and all we get to see is like one side of him. But I don't. It's just I don't know. I don't see how this limitation is applying as a limitation to the idea that I put forward, or polytheists in general put forward, as chaos.
So
it could be, the only difference that I see is that it's an entity that is defined by its changing. You could even say that it's immutable and that it is always constantly, constantly changing.
Let me make a quick meta comment. Let me make a quick meta comment. That what I just described, that condescension or covenant model.
Yeah, someone's sneaking up on you.
Is to answer the question: how can we say God creates? How can we predicate or attribute to God things that we do as creatures? Because he's not a creature. He doesn't have anything that's essentially in common with us whatsoever. He's completely other. So how can we say anything about God? And the answer to that is, well, because he chooses to take on creaturely properties in such a way to reveal what he is without them.
When does he choose that? Does he choose it from eternity? Is he choosing that at all times? And like
the moment he chooses, something changes.
That's a categorical error, right? Like,
doesn't he take on? Wait, doesn't he take on? Doesn't he take? Wait, hold on.
The in-time God or the out-of-time God?
Doesn't he take on contradictory attributes at that point? Then, wait, isn't that essentially what you're saying?
Hold on. Whoa. You're solving the you're saying that monotheism solves the problem by creating a polytheist setup, by having a God in one time and a God in another time doing different things. You're defending your monotheist position by functionally being a polytheist.
No, I'm just taking the incarnation. God is, Jesus is fully God, fully man. I'm taking that incarnation, and all I'm doing is I'm applying that across the spectrum. So anytime God is coming down to his people and saying, look, Moses, go talk to Pharaoh, or hey, Abraham, go over to this land. Anytime God does that, he is taking on a creaturely form to speak with us, because there's no other kind of relationship that he can have with us. He's completely different.
It's still a God A and God B kind of thing going on. You have the immutable thing, do anything, but then you have something else that's able to interact with us that is not immutable. And
see, I don't see how that obtains.
Well, how is it able to communicate if it's not immutable?
How is it able to communicate?
How is it able to communicate if it is immutable? Like, in order for me to communicate, I have to enunciate different syllables to you audibly. And there are points in the Bible in which God enunciates syllables audibly to, say, for example, Moses. In order for him to do that, he has to be mutable in order to express syllabic speech.
Again, I think that's the whole point of this perspective, is that God becomes what he wasn't while never ceasing to be what he was. He takes on properties that are not essential to him. He takes on accidental properties, created properties.
I can see why he's incomprehensible. He's violating the law of identity now.
No, he's not saying that he's losing the old properties. He's saying that he's
just gaining completely new properties that contradict the old property by creating a new version of himself in order to interact in this universe, thereby structuring himself polytheistically in order to solve the problem that he's saying can only be solved monotheistically. I think it's very interesting that he's saying you can't solve this problem through polytheism, and then he's creating polytheism in order to solve the problem.
Can I have a whack at the pinata?
Go ahead, Bert.
So you have God who is, for lack of a better term, prior to creation, right? Who doesn't have a state of affairs where he is relating to creation, and has one would think if God has thoughts, there's some type of intentionalistic aspect, some type of awareness or relationship with creation when he brings it into existence. So if you have a God who has essentially sent down the landing craft, so to speak, to leave the mothership, but maintaining radio contact. Radio contact is still established with the mothership, right? Like the mothership there's a change in relation to God, at the very least in respect to its intentionalistic states or its awareness, or its it can be said that the proposition is true that creation exists. Its relationships to these things change. So when you want to say then that is my misunderstanding because of God having to take on properties and communicate in a way that I can't understand it, how would I know that to be any different than just a contradiction? How can I distinguish between a contradiction, something that doesn't make sense and that I shouldn't believe, and something that is merely taking the form of something that doesn't make sense to me but I ought believe?
So, yeah, I think maybe I wasn't perfectly clear with like what's being taken on, but the whole point of God choosing to be incarnate and God choosing to come down, condescend to his creatures and speak to them, communicate himself to them, is that he takes on forms that are familiar to us. He takes on properties that make him relatable to us, because by default he's not. By default he's incomprehensible. The only that's one of the aseity and the doctrine of divine incomprehensibility are some of the most unique doctrines of Reformed theology. Reformed theology is one of the only denominations where God is held to be completely unknowable by default, except that he voluntarily takes it upon himself to reveal himself to people. But so when you talk about the whole mothership analogy, what I would say is that God, we have to remember, like, there's nothing for, you talk about intentionality, there's nothing for God to know or to think about except for himself outside of creation. Like he exists in eternity, loving himself, thinking about himself. He is his own object of awareness. And so when, speaking, using terms here that don't take on their regular meaning,
sure.
When God chooses to create something, inherent in that choice is the idea that God has to be intimately part of that thing, and that means taking on properties that are private to the thing that he's creating. They're not properties that are essential to him. But no contradiction occurs.
That's the weird thing, is when you say that God's taking on non-essential properties, but that this doesn't make him mutable, or that it doesn't impact his essential qualities. Like that these are that really is where I do agree with Ocean. This becomes an identity issue of having this thing that is of this thing but not of this thing, and right. That to me just ends up breaking down to a contradiction that I go, okay, well that just doesn't make sense. That can't be the case.
I only see
you're saying I ought believe it, and I'm wondering how you make a distinction there. How do you go like, okay, well this is this God that posited it is incoherent to me, but into itself it's coherent. Like, how do I know? How do I come to that conclusion?
Sure, it could totally be that I'm just not being clear. But what specifically is being thought here to be the incogency? Like, what are the forces here or propositions that are mutually exclusive, or I should say properties? Like, what are the properties or propositions that are?
I would say
the contradiction.
As soon as God acts, that God's not changing. Like I think he's changed as soon as he's acted. He's acted, and there's something in relationship to him. Unless he's completely unaware of it, like I don't even know how he acts then. Like this breaks down for me. It doesn't even make sense to even try to talk about. But
I mean, like the words "take on," like God takes on properties. How can an unchanging being take on properties?
Right. So what it means is that something changes, but without the cause changing. In other words, normally when, like in the universe, obviously, when we look at causes and effects, the cause changes as of even having an effect. But what it means for God to cause things or to create things means that he doesn't change while things that are the recipient of his acts change. Right.
But there's another factor that kind of puzzles me with this is, if God is a perfect, unchanged, a perfect being, then either the attributes already exist or they're unnecessary because they are not perfect. So why would it need to take on anything that doesn't already, already a part of his perfection?
That's a great question. Yeah, I have. I do not know why God. I think that's just. I think that's openly admitted in my theological camp. I think Max is as well. That I have no idea why God chooses to create anything at all. That's a very strange happenstance.
Actually, I believe the Catechism says that God creates for its own sake. It's agape. It's creating something for its own sake rather than for a purpose that's either anterior to it, like some kind of internal desire or want or need, nor is it for some kind of extrinsic push, like an object outside of you pushing or forcing you to do something. So that's why God creates. God creates for its own sake, but not for the sake of anything else. It's kind of like a categorical imperative. When someone does the good, they do it because they recognize it as good, not because they do it for any practical need or necessity. It's similar.
Go ahead and finish, Max, and let's have Dash go. And then Ozzy joined. We'll have Ozzy go after.
Right. That would be the best explanation. And one way to reconcile it with, well, doesn't God do it because he recognizes something good? It's because he recognizes himself as the good that he creates for its own sake. And of course, the Trinity kind of helps that out because God the Father recognizes the Son and the Holy Spirit also as the good. And the will of creation is kind of an embodiment for its own sake as, a kind of embodiment of that love for one another.
Go for it, Dash.
I actually have a question on what you said. I mean, I'm not a firm believer, but if I would to be active believer, I would want to believe that there is meaning to creation, meaning that what I mean in it that that the creation have some end in itself. Of course, the end is. I would say the end is good as a believer, but I don't think it would be enough to me to say that the end is good. The end of the creation is good. I would want to know what make it good, what the goal here, how do I achieve it, how do I get closer to it, as it have some markings of the good in that regard. I mean, dividing it that he created for himself seems to me a bit hard. Me myself.
I mean, I think that's at least from my perspective, that is what one of the things that makes God who he is it is about God. Everything is about God. The world revolves around him. God is the only one who is just and good and even compassionate to others when he is an egoist. For God to put things as everything being about his glory is the purpose of our existence.
Did you want to go ahead, Ozzy?
Yeah, sure. For some reason, my camera keeps winking in and out. In every Burt Pool hangout, my camera just flashes on and off. So if I disappear, as is happening now, you'll know I'm not messing with you. Hi, Jimmy. It's nice to finally speak to you. I don't know if we've had occasion to talk before.
Yeah, good to see you.
I was following in the live chat, and I had sort of had some questions, and I actually have a proposal for you about this business of aseity and immutability. I've never been persuaded by arguments that try to suggest that aseity implies immutability. And just to reiterate, for people who are unfamiliar with aseity, it means this concept of self-existence, that something exists in and of itself, and its existence or its properties, or including its properties, if any, don't depend on anything else. It's a non-contingent being. It exists in and of itself, not because of anything else, not caused by anything else. It just is the way it is, and it just has to be that way, and there can be no other way. And so that's how God is, under classical theism, is understood as a necessary being, uncontingent, non-dependent on anything else. Now, one of the ways that we typically sort of pick out things that are contingent, namely everything else, everything we see around us, including ourselves, as being contingent, as opposed to having aseity, is that we undergo changes. We know that, if we undergo any kinds of changes, it's usually because there's a cause. We always presuppose that there's a cause when we see a state of affairs. It's an assumption that we make. If something undergoes some kind of change, whether it's created or destroyed or just changes form or exhibits new properties or qualities, we assume that there is some external factor that acted upon that thing. And so whatever qualities it has, whatever the state of that thing is, it isn't in that state in and of itself. It's that the state of that thing rests upon some other thing. Okay, so those are contingent things. So we're contingent things. Everything around us is a contingent thing. Okay, but I think the mistake is to think that because contingent things, a quality of contingent things is that they are acted upon by things. There's a tendency to think that anything that had the quality of aseity, if there is such a thing, I think we can question that, but let's say that hypothetically that we have this concept of aseity, of something existing necessarily. I think it's a mistake to think that it has to exist over and against a contingent thing, even with regard to being mutable, that it can't be mutable, that it has to be immutable, it can't undergo changes. I think that something in principle can have the quality of aseity, right? That this concept of aseity, I think, is perfectly compatible with the concept of mutability, of changing. It just isn't changed by anything else. The changes arise within its own nature. It is, in and of itself, necessarily a changing thing, right? The difficulty, I think, for Christian theism is people have wanted to suggest that God is unchanging. Well, if you insist that he's unchanging, it has an unchanging nature, well, then you've got a problem. Then the problems arise where, how could he get around to creating anything? It doesn't make sense. And you can posit sort of, creation outside of time, and you can speak, as Max was speaking of sustaining instead of creating, and creating is how we understand it, but it's more of an eternal sustaining of the universe, right? But if you imagine that there was a state of affairs, forget time, God outside, let's posit God is atemporal, okay? If you posit a state of affairs where there wasn't a universe, or there isn't a universe, right? There's a state of affairs where there's a God and no universe, and then there's a state of affairs where there is a universe. Those are two different states of affairs, and I don't care which you think comes first or whether they occur out of time. The point is you have two different states of affairs. Well, if you have two different states of affairs, that's mutability. There is God the creator, sustainer, and then there's God when he's not doing that. And to simply insist that, well, he was always doing it, that means that the universe was always being created. But God is eternal, which means that the universe is also eternal. But I think we want to say that, no, the universe is an artifact of God's will, and it is an action, an intentional action. So I think that the solution here for you, and this is my proposal to you, is you can have aseity and you can have mutability. God can change. But nothing. But he doesn't change in response to anything. Nothing acts on God. God is just in and of himself a changing thing. So I think you can. In other words, you can have your cake and eat it too. In this case, if you're going to posit aseity, which is not some fact in evidence, it's just a mere concept we've come up with that you think is applicable to God and characterizes God's nature, then I don't see any reason in principle why that thing can't change. I think the only reason why people want to say that is that there's this tradition of saying that God is unchanging. But I'm not aware of anything in your doctrines and in Scripture that necessitates that you stand firm on that as some kind of dogma, that he has to have an unchanging nature. I think he can have an unchanging, necessary nature. Right? So I think his aseity could be changing, could be mutable.
But if he defines it that way, he can't use it against chaos, because as soon as you say that something immutable can be changing, chaos becomes an option, and then that unlocks polytheism. When the question that I was asking was, why is polytheism impossible? Because he was talking about how polytheism, there's some kind of some sort of negotiation that is a problem that needs to be solved that in order to make polytheism work. I was trying to figure out like what that problem is, and it's about the negotiation between aseity and immutability.
Okay, well, I don't want to sort of. Okay, I'm not trying to sort of derail that little dialectic.
If you accept the proposition, if he accepts your proposition, that argument then fails.
Can we hear from? Let's hear from Jimmy directly to Ozzy's proposal. What he would see as being problematic with that. Then we can get to the implications to you, Ocean. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, I made my point.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Ocean. I think that was well said. If my contention against polytheism was that immutability and aseity, that polytheism kind of needs aseity, but aseity can't really be had because of immutability, at least with the chaos idea. To the concept that you could be ase, or that you could be absolutely independent from everything else, without being immutable, I think there's two problems that arise. The first is, I feel bad because Ozzy was extremely clear. That was way clearer than I've been in this entire conversation. So I hope this doesn't come off as dismissive hand-waving, but it actually is part of Reformed doctrine that God is immutable. There's verses like Hebrews 6, where it talks about our assurance in Christ's work and the promises concerning Christ being founded on the fact that God is unchanging. The reason we can have assurance in that God won't change his mind about our salvation is because he doesn't change. Another place is, I think it's in Numbers, where God says, "I am not a man that I should change," or "I'm not a man that I should lie." Like God doesn't change his mind. God is absolute with respect to his personhood, his character, and his plans. So I do think it's problematic. It's a sort of compromise on my part to the Christian faith that I hold. If I want to say God can avoid immutability, as far as immutability being entailed from aseity, I don't. It is very abstract to argue that, but I'm not sure I'm not sure difficulty and abstraction are the same thing. The argument I would give for immutability following from aseity is just that aseity includes that God cannot participate in properties or qualities or any kind of reality outside of himself, right? He's independent. He is what he is in and of himself. So he cannot depend on things outside of himself in order to exist or in order to know who he is or to be who he is. Everything about him has to already be self-contained. But if God is self-contained, it sounded like somebody wanted to...
I was going to interject, but no, go ahead. Go ahead, finish, please.
Okay, sorry. If God is self-contained, if God is not dependent on outside factors, we have a problem as soon as we divide God into the categories of what he isn't yet and what he is already, because the differences between those two properties need to be explained. If they're explained by God, then the difference fades. There's no real distinction between what he isn't yet and what he is already. It's just, I always have all these properties. If the distinction is explained in terms of a third reality, then God isn't a say anymore. He's participating in something outside of himself in order to explain the fact that he was at one point something and now at another point he's not that thing anymore.
Well, why couldn't it be in principle that something has, as a part of its nature, that it will be a certain way at some point, and that fact about itself is not an effect of anything else, that there's no other state of affairs that makes that the case? It's just a sort of a brute fact about reality, that God at time t is this way, and at t plus 1 is a different way, and at t plus 2 is different again. In other words, that would still be aseity, Okay, but it would be a changing aseity. I don't see any contradiction there. Now, you do have a problem if you insist that the passages that you're talking about in Scripture are to be construed as God is absolutely unchanging. But like you alluded to a passage where God doesn't change his mind. Well, maybe he doesn't change his mind. But I mean, I think we have to. I mean, I'm going to appeal to context here. I mean, if I were a Christian, I would say, well, listen, what is it actually saying in that context? Is actually saying that God never changes his mind about anything, or he's just never going to renege on his word, right? I mean, I change my mind all the time, right? But supposing I never broke a promise, right? But I changed my mind. I changed my mind what I want for breakfast one day and what I'm going to wear and stuff like that. But that's not the same thing as reneging on a promise, right? So I mean, if God is honest and sincere and he never reneges on his word, I think, maybe in that particular text, in that particular passage, that might be what's being referred to. And that should not be read so broadly as God is unchanging in every one of his attributes, right? So I don't know. I would suspect that there's plenty of wiggle room there. But I mean, the Scriptures better than I do, especially the passages that you have in mind. But it seems to me that the metaphysical and logical problems that you're encountering here rest on the assumption that if something exists necessarily and isn't contingent, that it can't change, and that just seems to be a non sequitur. I mean, I don't see why those two have to go hand in hand. They could be. That could be the case, but I don't see why it has to be the case. So I wouldn't be leveraging too much of my theology on that one, right?
Can I respond real quick to the concept of necessarily being something at time t and
sure,
something else? Really quick. So I think, ironically, I think I would agree with you just by triviality, that I would have a trivial agreement with you. But I would say, yes, there are modes of God's being. We call those the persons of the Trinity. God the Father is different than God the Son. God the Son is different than the Spirit. But I don't think that that's what people normally mean by change. Neither in the history of philosophy regarding immutability, neither in modern philosophy of religion, where people like Boyd are challenging the notion that God can be an unchanging being, where that has become extremely controversial.
Is this the Boyd, like the Christus Victor? Is that Boyd?
Probably.
Okay.
That sounds. It's what is his first name? It's
Greg.
the most.
Greg.
Yeah, Greg
Boyd.
Greg
yeah.
Boyd. Most moved
of,
mover. Yeah.
Right.
So what I would say is, yeah, I agree with you that there can be different tenses in God, such that when we predicate about God, when we attribute predicates to God, there are differences in God's ontology such that you can say of the Father, he is always begetting of the Son, but you cannot say of the Son, he is always begetting of the Father. Yet, I would not call that a change. I would just say that, those are eternal persons of the Godhead, or those are our states or modes of being that God has eternally. But in other words, the word change seems to either take on a very bizarre meaning there, or it just doesn't mean what we were originally talking about, which is the concept of mutability. I don't know, that would be my response to it.
It seemed to me that simply change would simply be one state of affairs that leads to another, right? So if God's undergoing any type of change in that sense, right, where it's not the same God, essentially, right? Either through act or through like intentionalistic content, or even, I would think, it seemed to me relationally, especially because he's the whole of existence. If there are new non-essential parts, right? Like I think just by relations, God has changed. But that's why it's a little queer to me. I understand why you're doing it. I completely understand why you're doing it. I don't know that I would do it any differently. But that's where I get into adopting contradictions or things that you have to refer to analogical language or some other means to communicate. You're saying this is beyond what I can understand because it's a contradiction, right? Like if it wasn't contradictory, you wouldn't have to use analogical language, or you wouldn't have to posit some other way of speaking about it, right? You could predicate it just normally, right? But in some of these cases, they're outright contradictions. It seems to me, like calling him unchanging when there are two states of affairs where God is not the same, and saying that God has a non-essential portion. Again, just repeating myself now at this point, but that to me seems like to just to reject that for other commitments, which could simply just be thought of differently, in favor of taking on the contradictions, but saying that the contradictions are just something I'm simply not understanding. That seems to me an unusual move. It seems to me like you're like tethered to these commitments in such a way that you can't allow your reasoning to take you where you need it to go. Instead, you're going to hold on to those and posit contradictions, but say that it's just simply a matter of your not understanding. And I don't know how you distinguish between when to reject those things because they are contradictions, and when you say, this I'm going to stay committed to because it has to be this way, even though it seems contradictory. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe we're beating a dead horse at this point. So
I say faith can seek understanding just as well as doubt can, so I have no problem with him persisting in faith. It's just...
Right. Yeah, I don't have it. You can keep on believing it, Jimmy. I don't have any problem with that.
We can find for all we know, there can be a resolution to this, and we're just not seeing it, right? On the other hand, perhaps there is no resolution, and we're right in that there's a contradiction. So.
Well, I think this is what it comes down to. Like, I don't see, if I'm positing that there's a being who has essential properties, and then he has accidental properties or creaturely properties, right? Created properties that he takes on. So long as the predicates that we're assigning to God are not contradicting within one of those two senses or within one of those two modes of God's existence. In the same way that, I can say a ball is red and it's not red. Right? Well, what do you mean? Well, it's red in the sense that it has red dots. It's not red in the sense that it has a green background. As long as we keep the concept of, hey, in a sense, God is immutable. That is in the sense that he is beyond creation. He is changing as the God who condescends. Of course he changes. He straight up says in Genesis 6, I repented of making man. Like, how does someone who doesn't believe God can change explain that? I don't think that they can. I think that Thomas Aquinas is like the best example of somebody who tries to explain things like that without this condescension model. But I don't think it works. I think you need a God who takes on the properties that can change, who takes on an earthly frame. Yeah,
but the question is, how does he take it on? How does that work?
What is beyond? I just cannot understand what beyond. I mean, I guess it's the definition of universe that you're using. You said beyond creation, I guess, but I just see it. I just see it so very, very differently. I just don't get it. I'm sorry.
He's other than creation.
Yeah.
Can I make a remark about the analogical language thing, Bert?
Yeah, and before you do, let me just clarify. I don't have a problem with analogical. I don't have a problem with analogical language, but there has to be a point of analogy is my problem. So when you can't offer me actually how it's analogous, I'm fine with there being differences, but there has to be some point of contact.
Okay, you're not allowed to beat me to the punchline. That's like, it makes my intelligence look less when you do that. Kidding. No, yeah, exactly. So that's the problem with people like that seems to be the problem that comes with people like Trey Jadlow, and there was somebody else in your video who was like trying to explain it, and it was hilarious because they were like, it's like like that's literally the explanation that was given in the video. Yeah, the point of connection is the revelation of God. The point of analogy is this condescension that God has taken on. So when I predicate things about God as he is beyond the universe, the language I'm using is the language that God himself has given me as a...
Actually, let me raise... I'm sorry, Lolly, or
how do you understand
or whatever you're doing.
It's fine. Babe.
Whatever you're doing. No, and you haven't gone much, but actually I wanted to bring up, this is actually the example I brought up with Trey, that when I was in the Xbox Floyd hangout, and and it was the question from the external chat actually, so it's relevant to here. So the Jesus when he died, Trey had a hard time saying whether that was the man nature dying or God dying, or I think you want to say the man died, God did not. But that is one being or one person, right? But so how that what was pointed out in the external chat is that that's an essential property of God's existence, right? But that death, I guess, depends on how you understand death with existence, and death, Christian death, technically isn't real death, in the death in the sense of going out of existence, right? So I think there's a little bit there, but I understand the point of, it would seem to me that the death and the death of Christ becomes a touch point where I don't know what you're referring to when you say God isn't changed by that, right? Like that seems like if there was ever a point, that would seem to be the point, right?
Just, I'm not trying to, again, I always feel bad because I can either come across as pedantic, or I can come across as...
Don't worry about how you come across. It's fine. Like we just had like two and a half hours of discourse, and if people can't charitably take you, however you just say it, then too bad for them. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. So what I think is important here is like part of this whole condescension model is that you have the distinction between God the Trinity, the persons of the Trinity preceding creation, and you have the economic Trinity, or that is the roles that the Father, Son, and Spirit take in interacting with creation. And so I would just bite the bullet and say, yeah, I do think God dies. I do think the person of Jesus dies. But because I think that the person can participate in or inherit properties of his natures where the properties of the natures aren't inheritable between each other.
Oh, wow.
Right, so there's a communication or an inheritance of properties between both Jesus's natures. Jesus, the person, died, but Jesus, the person, died and rose again as a man. Right, that even though the person has that property and the humanness of, or the human nature of that person has that property, the godhood of that person does not have that property.
But you would say Jesus's manhood is that not an essential? That's a actual property of Jesus.
Ask that one more time.
Just whether it's so hard to put, like what Jesus' man.
I know.
Jesus' manhood, and I mean that in the theological sense of the word.
His humanity.
His humanity. Yeah. His manhood. Was that a essential or an accidental part of him? I assume you'd say it's accidental.
I hope his manhood isn't accidental.
Okay,
But isn't he omnipotent?
That's an excellent. I think that
Sorry.
His manhood.
I think that the humanity of Jesus is accidental to. I think that the humanity of Jesus is accidental to God, which means the Son, the person, as well. But I don't think that his humanity is accidental to the incarnation.
Yeah, that's a little weird, right? Because Jesus was the perfect sacrifice because he lived and lived as we do, right? Like he was without sin, right? He was perfect, but fully man, right? So then
Right.
when that's accidental, man, that really seems to cheapen it quite a bit.
Accidental properties are just, you know what he means by accidental, right?
It's non-essential.
what
I
is-
think we understand that they're non-essential properties.
How does that cheapen it? I don't get it.
So here would be a good example. H2O is an essential for anything to be called
I
water,
know.
but it doesn't need to be frozen for it to be
I know that.
water. It could be frozen, liquid, or gaseous.
Like, why? I get that. Like, I know essential stuff. Why does it cheapen it? Why does? I mean, I still don't understand how God could have essential properties, right? I don't know how that would work out. I mean, accidental properties.
I was going to say.
Why would?
Sorry.
That's my issue. I don't even understand how God could have accidental properties. I don't see how that would even work. But why would Jesus's, given that it can happen somehow, why would Jesus's humanity being accidental make it?
Well, is it simply the fact that one man's sinless life paid for all sin, right? Like,
yeah, through Adam and then through Christ. Yeah, the idea is that through Adam, man enters. There's a verse.
Duns Scotus, who's one of the scholastics, actually argued that even if mankind didn't sin, let's say there was that hypothetical, Jesus would still have become incarnate because the presence of the Creator as creature is there to glorify all the rest of creation.
Right. So even and taking that to Revelation, like this is the concept of, God walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. Even before sin came into the world, God had to stoop down and reveal to Adam and tell him what his purpose was in the garden. There is no the at least Reformed Christian concept here is there is no being a man, there is no human being outside of the revelation and interaction that we have with God. We're made to be creatures who interact with our Creator.
But this is where it all starts getting hurtful for me, because God created these people. If he's omniscient, he knows what they're going to do. If he's not, then he's not omniscient. If he doesn't know what they're going to do, then he's no longer omniscient. Okay, so he knew that they would eat of the fruit. He knew that they would do these things. Punished humanity with a flood for doing it, and then needs to die to forgive people for doing something that he knew that they would do in the first place. That makes no sense.
I don't think that's neither here nor there. I think what Jimmy's getting at is that creation is better when the Creator condescends to humanity than not. That's it.
And I think, I think the essence of creation, that is, there is no creation other than this property that I'm about to state, namely, creation exists to be interactive with God. It is always something that is in relation to its Creator.
If a God existed, I would like to know. So I agree. I'm on your side with this. And the only way I imagine I could know is if he manifested himself in such a way that I could know. So, which would be like in the flesh.
Right. It gives us some. Yeah. Another way to go about this, and that's actually an excellent point, Frank. Another way to go about it is to think if creation exists for something, it exists for the highest purpose, and what higher purpose is there than glorifying God Himself?
Right.
Well, that's not what I was saying, but like.
No. I said that's a good. Yeah. That's a good reason, and no, I said that's. I know that's not what you said. I was saying that's a good reason. Another reason to give is this explanation I just gave there.
I got it. Okay.
You're right.
Let me jump on the whole. Let me jump on the cheapening humanity thing real quick, because I think. I want to respect what you're saying there, Bert, because I may totally be strawmanning you here, but. Let me just add this distinction really quick. It is true that Christ's humanity is accidental to his Godhead, and therefore accidental to his personhood. by default. I mean, his personhood precedes creation altogether. But what I would say is Christ's humanity is essential to the incarnation, is essential to his work as the Savior. Mm-hmm. And also, it is humanity essentially. So it's not like I have some human properties, but not all of them, or I have a human body, but I don't have a human brain or mind or intelligence or anything like that. No, everything about what is essentially human is contained in the incarnation. Like, I mean, just to be as extreme as I can be, like, Jesus had a penis. I mean, when you say manhood, like, yes, everything about a human being is contained in Jesus. That's part of the magnificence of it. That's part of what makes it so glorious.
Yeah. Was it omnipotent though?
not the humanity, right? Not the humanity, right?
Well, I mean, if his manhood was perfect, consider this. Consider that he would have been circumcised, and what that says for those of us who are not circumcised.
You are more than perfect.
Those of you who are not.
More than perfect.
I'm happy to have been brought up in Canada.
Oh,
me too.
Shots fired.
Yeah, I still have the Steve Jobs polo neck.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, fuck.
Officially entered the realm of too much information.
Hey,
with the exception
you started it. You started it.
I know I did.
Your omnipotent joke. So.
I'm very, very, very happy with that.
But Jesus was ugly, as we know, or he was not. It doesn't. People were saying that it had to be a perfect penis, but it would not have been. It would have been.
Think about, for example. Really quick. Think about how racist and imperialist so many depictions of Jesus has been. He's just always been a white man. With like very fine features, like this is a guy from the Middle East.
Yeah,
like,
very Scandinavian. He became very Scandinavian.
Like this is the most racist Jesus
Willem
I've ever
Dafoe.
Right, well, if he was depicted as like 5'6", like super hairy, but like kind of maybe pattern baldness or something.
My favorite description thus far has been MK's. He said, at one point, Jesus was a Jew. He had a Jew fro. And he was just in his completely deadpan voice, just like, he had a Jew fro. And I was like, oh my fucking word, I love you.
But the thing is, I think people would have a hard time with that, actually. So it is funny that it migrated to something much more appealing, I guess.
Actually, it's in one of the courses we doing history major now, but we read a text about monks creating a monastery in the Middle Ages, and it's kind of interesting to see how the term desert changed meaning. You don't have desert. Desert. Oh, you don't have desert in Europe, and they have texts that say desert. So desert become desolate or something empty. I mean, the change you talk about Jesus is somewhat same. The context change and the image to represent or sort of art. The depiction change as well. And that's some historical thought, kind of thought.
That's interesting. Cliff wants to take the discussion down a notch, apparently.
No, it's the other way around. It's
okay.
Up a notch. We've gone down the gutter. I'm trying to bring it out.
I thought you were saying, like, now that we've gone down the gutter, since we're here.
Yeah. No.
That's crude.
One of the things you were saying early on in the conversation before it was opened up, you were talking about, what was the word? Soteriology. The doctrine of salvation. Is this something that has kind of popped out of Calvinism? Because Calvinism for me has always seemed a little bit aristocratic, we're the elect. And if you listen to the likes of Matthew Slick and people like that who, sort of give all these, oh, we're the elect and, we know these things better and we've had this revelation and so on. And it's, it kind of bothers me because this idea of soteriology almost sounds like it's a Calvinistic created tool to point fingers and say, oh yeah, you're not a proper Christian. No, you're not a Christian. No, you're not a Christian. I'm a Christian, but you lot aren't. No. So it's basically the manifestation of the Notary Scotsman fallacy.
Jimmy, would you mind if I answer in part some of this one?
Yeah.
Actually, I couldn't get this separate.
I'm sorry, Max. You can't because you're not a proper Christian. Because I believe, are you Catholic now or?
I'm Catholic, but
yeah, there you go. You say.
I actually get the impression that Calvinism is actually less aristocratic, and for good reason. So, for example, let's say you are a free will kind of Baptist Christian, one who believes that God gives everyone the proper potential to be saved. Now, if I were to ask you, hey, why are you saved and not other people, what would you say?
You're asking me?
No, I'm asking Cliff.
Oh. I don't know. I mean, I don't really think in those terms because I've never been a Christian. So,
but if I was the atheist and you're the Christian, what would you say? And you believed in the whole everyone has the potential to be saved thing. What would you say is the reason you're saved and I'm not?
Oh, well, it would just be, because I believe in Jesus. I mean, that's
Okay, but why do you believe in Jesus? I mean, I could have potentially believed in Jesus, but why are you the one who believes in it?
Well, it's difficult for me to say because I've never been a believer. I've always been an atheist.
Yeah, but chances are you say
people find their reasons, whatever the justification is,
But there it is. It's something you've done. It's your justification. It's your ability to reason it out.
Yes, I know, but what I'm trying to say is
achieved. Whereas,
but with the Calvinistic thing, they are basically they will say, yes, but you say this verse doesn't count. This verse is the important one. This one says, the ones who God chooses will be, are the elect or whatever.
Yeah.
But the belief part, because it basically says, what was it? Whoever believes, will be saved. I can't remember what the verse was now, but it's basically words to that effect.
John 3:16.
No, that's for God who loved the world. He gave his only son.
But that's more of an exegetical. But that's more of an exegetical reason. That's more of an exegetical difference. What I mean is, under Calvinism, no one can rightfully say that they deserve anything that they've been given. Whereas with the opposite position, it's like, hey, there's something I myself have done to earn this, and this is where I could possibly say I have a bit of air of superiority here. And about the whole predestination stuff, like that's been a cornerstone in Christianity since before Calvin. St. Augustine of Hippo, Thomas Aquinas both talked about an elect God has chosen. So it's not really new to Calvin, although Calvin, as a proponent, was someone who emphasized it far more than either the scholastics or the patristics.
And I think what I was trying to say is that the people that cling on to this, tend to be Calvinists. Matt Slick being an example. Where he's basically trying to say that certain people aren't Christians. And he will point the finger out and say, "Yep, these people aren't." And of course, here's the problem: that if you read the Bible, it says God chooses who's the people don't choose to believe. God chooses whether you're a Christian. God chooses whether you're saved. So they have no way of knowing that they're saved. They just believe that they're saved, but they'll parse it in a way that, I'm saved. I'm saved. You hear it all the time.
Right.
I think in terms of the thought, I never understood the claim for authority that some make, but in terms of the aristocratic nature, I think it's justified both in a weird way. I mean, you can justify absolute monarchy just as much, saying that you need a strong theocratic rule that by one, but in the same time you can justify something really more communist in nature or communal in nature, that everyone is equal in the community.
Mm-hmm. But the question that I was asking really was for Jimmy. You know, what do you think to this? You know.
Okay.
Yeah. What do I think? Man, all I can say, Cliff, really is I don't think it's a relationship to Calvinism per se. I've met many a snooty and, to use your term, aristocratic Molinist or libertarian. I think the problem is maybe more that there's a bad character flaw on part of the person that they're not dealing with, and that character flaw tends to be related to thinking you're better for knowing more. Like, I mean, how can you be a true Calvinist and think that because you know a couple of verses better than somebody else that, oh, I'm magically a better Christian than them? Like, that's terrible. That's awful. My theology is even if my theology
people
is better
do it though. That's true, and that's very sad.
Of Calvinism, if I could.
Inspired Philosophy actually has something of a video on this. This very point that you're making. It's what is it? I'll have to search it up. But like this idea that any non-Christian view forces you to sort of base your self-worth on this or that thing, like say your knowledge, and by virtue of basing your self-worth on your knowledge, you of necessity have to compare yourself to others and view yourself as superior in some sense. Whereas if you're a Christian, you base your self-worth on a, I don't remember what it was, like just God or being human or some such.
What Jesus has done for you.
God, you don't value yourself more. I'm done.
So yeah, that's absolutely right. I think the image here have any of you seen Ben-Hur?
Ben-Hur.
Not the new one.
Not the new one. That doesn't count. That's not real.
Long time ago.
That's not real.
Okay.
The real Ben-Hur is real.
Oh come on! It's like those sequels to The Matrix that everybody keeps mentioning. Like, we all know they don't exist. Come on.
I mostly recall like robes, desert, much arm lifting, and
okay, go look up this scene. Go look up this scene. There's this fantastic scene. I just love the scene where the protagonist is betrayed by his best friend, and he's enslaved by the Romans, and so he's traveling through the desert to live in this galley where he's going to help the Romans fight Huns for like 4 years straight or whatever, right? He's going to waste 4 years being a slave on a boat where he'll probably die. And even as he's traveling across the desert, you know, some of the slaves are dying off just because of thirst and hunger, just to show the brutality of the Romans. And they get to this place where they're giving some of the slaves water, and the Roman guard who's giving them water like flaunts the water in front of the protagonist and then takes it away from him. It's like despairing. He's enraged at his life. He's angry where he is, and so he collapses on the ground. And Jesus comes over, and you never see his face. You only see him from behind. But he comes over, and you're watching the back of this Jesus character, like lean down and put water in his face. And it's his face when he looks up and sees this Jesus character. He's just caught in complete awe. Like, who is this weird nobody person that would dare to step down to where I'm at? Like, that is Calvinism.
I used to get really teary-eyed actually during that. That was I probably have watched that. I haven't watched it probably in 20 years, but up till 20 years ago, I probably watched that film like 30 times or something like that. I still love it.
And then if you looked at his face, you'd realize it was Max von Sydow.
I did want to mention, so Unspeakable, you were going to say something earlier? Okay, she's It's not there.
Yeah, I'm here. I just
Okay.
I hadn't done my thing. Cliff was talking about kind of critiquing Calvinism there, and I see it very differently. Although there's definitely something about. There's a certain personality that definitely gravitates to it sometimes in some cases, but I think there's also an honesty to the way I see that with them interact with people. Some Calvinists, Jimmy included, in that one of the things I find most disconcerting about the way most theists interact with non-theists is the admonition to believe, as if we choose it. And Calvinists don't do that. If they're actual Calvinists, if they're actual five-pointers, they acknowledge this is not something that one can choose to do.
Which is good.
I cannot choose to believe in this. Either it happens or it doesn't. Either this God comes to me or he doesn't, and they're not going to come to me and say, why don't you just believe this? And I'll be like, well, because your God hasn't chosen to let me believe this yet. And if he does, great. If he doesn't, I don't think that this God is a thing, but it gives us okay, I'm going to acknowledge, okay, in your estimation, I would be one of the non-elect. That's okay. I get it. Let's move on from there.
Cool.
You know?
But then suddenly God becomes an arsehole. Because
that's okay.
If there are people
No. This is the way that I think that I get this. I get it. I've actually heard, I think, Jimmy articulate this. It's a chessboard thing. This is we are pieces and we play certain roles. And if my role happens to be in the map that they have laid out, if this is my role, I'm just going to be like, I grant you that. I don't care about that at this point. I don't need you. I don't need to convince you otherwise. I get it. Let's move on and talk about other things. But we can talk about the system of it instead of whether or not I'm going to hell.
You see, for me, this is this is where God becomes the moral monster, because if he created certain people, I'm going to use me as an example because it's convenient. Okay, I've never believed. Okay, never been a Christian and deconverted. I've never believed any of that stuff.
Neither have I.
So what happens is I was created to go to hell. I'm not going to get the revelation. I'm just going to hell. That's the standard. How can God be loving and want me to be created to go to hell?
That's the thing. I don't grant that this God is anything.
This is too rich of an analogy to pass up. I mean, you brought up
essentially my view as well.
You brought up the point of no, I can stay longer, Jimmy. I want to make sure we hit Joe's starfish's question, but but I just want to make a point here because you brought up about playing chess, and the way that I see it, Cliff, is that you're the sacrificed pawn in a game where God is playing chess against himself, essentially.
Yeah.
And to show how good of a chess player he is, like essentially, he is playing both sides of the board, and you are a piece sacrificed so that he could win the game, but he's not playing chess against anybody, right?
Yeah.
How that's my beef is that how worthwhile or glorious is it to beat yourself at chess? Right?
Yeah, my thing is, the way I put it, I'll use biblical language, right? You have this one phrase in the Bible somewhere and it says, we love God because he loved us first. And it's like, well, does that mean everyone who hates God hates them because God hates them first? Is that how it works?
Maybe if I could draw on the prototype of the Reformation, although I think the Reformation carried it across far more than he would have envisioned. But St. Augustine argues it along these lines. When God makes creation, of course it's to glorify himself and glorify creation. So when he creates mankind, he wants he foresees certain events and actions as they'll unfold, and from there he'll want to maximize the virtue and glory within creation. So when he sees evil and he passes on intervening, when he passes from that, he will bring about an even greater good. So from the fall, rather than preventing it, he'll opt to have it go through because the beings who fell consented to it, they're still blameworthy. And from it, he'll prefer to exemplify the traits of both justice and mercy. Justice by giving the unrepented what they deserve by sin, but merciful in redeeming a certain segment of mankind. And thus, he'll exemplify both these virtues that would go unexemplified, well, one or the other, if he had chose to pass up reprobating. So we could do good.
And exactly as you just said, that makes God a moral monster. And
I
came up. Can I just get this out, because this is
Sure.
I think this is my argument against God. Okay, not that I believe God exists, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yes. Go.
If hell exists, then God is a moral monster, and is worse and is worse than ISIS. I've got this argument I've formulated. Okay, so. Okay. If you and me, Max, we're friends. I consider us friends. We disagree on things, but we're friends, okay? If we have an irreconcilable difference, I would just shut you out of my life. Like, I can't deal with that guy anymore. The guy's an arsehole. I just don't want him in my life anymore. That's it. We're done. You know, and that's it. And I just ignore you, okay? What I wouldn't do is build a prison, lock you in it, and then set it on fire. That's what ISIS did when they captured that Jordanian pilot. They locked him in a cage, poured petrol on him, and set him on fire. But the difference between God and ISIS is that when ISIS set him on fire, they knew he would die, whereas God actively prevents people from dying in hell.
Oh, okay.
But, forever, that kind of thing. So, under that definition, if hell exists and God exists, then that makes God a moral monster, because some people are born to go to hell for no crime other than not believing in something because they weren't given evidence or a personal revelation.
Oh, okay. So the response here would be worse than that. Actually, my response would be that you're even worse. My response would probably be by not letting you go and not holding you accountable for your sins. God would be in effect letting somebody go free from punishment, or not treating a sin as severely as it deserves to be. It would be like a judge seeing an ISIS agent performing all this malevolent action, and then just giving him a light sentence, or just asking him, just leave civil society, just don't come back.
Yeah, but
the reason is because an offense against an all perfect and all just God in sin is worthy of infinite repercussion. Now you might say, but my sins are temporary; they're finite. Augustine actually has this addressed. He says, there are plenty of things that only take less than a minute to perform an evil action. How about giving a kiss in lust to a friend's wife? That is something that only takes less than a minute, yet it causes a lot of trauma and heartbreak. And of course, there are sentences which far exceed the smaller window of time. So, if anything, God not punishing you from your sins would invalidate and go against his justice. Furthermore,
but here's the problem, though. There's a problem that goes into that whole thing, which is God created me to sin.
No, he didn't. He allowed you to sin. There's a difference between.
He knew I would not do it. If he's omniscient, he knows I'm not going to do this.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Sure.
Can I jump in here real quick? So, here's an interesting point. Just the funny thing is that I believe in double predestination. I actually am agreeing here with Max. But here's an interesting point. Timothy Keller, who's not a presuppositionalist, pointed out in his book The Reason for God. He pointed out that it's a very Western ideal, that it is very culturally relative to think that God is evil for the existence of hell, and that actually, if you went to cultures in many cultures in Africa or in Asia, you would find people horrified at the concept that God would show grace to people, because justice is so much more of a big deal over in those countries. In our country, where we are saturated with Christianity, where we are saturated with grace and the concept of forgiveness, we take it for granted. We just expect people to forgive us. We expect people to let us off the hook, and we expect God not to throw us in jail for being bad children.
I don't.
But in a country where justice is a big deal, that's actually the sin for them on God's part, is, God, how dare you forgive people? How dare you not carry out justice to its total end?
But doesn't justice, I mean, there's some sort of fairness. It's kind of unfair to infinitely torture someone for finite crimes.
No, actually, I just addressed that. There are tons of crimes that we punish that are never proportional in the time it takes to commit them. For example, we could shutting out someone completely out of our lives because he hit on our wife, or worse, grabbed her by the pussy. That literally.
Hey, Max, you want to do some furniture shopping?
Yes.
Plus one.
Yes, some magnificent bastard stole my story. In any case, like, that's something that would cause, even there's no great consequence to it in the long run. We would want that to shut down that kind of person out of our lives completely. Like, there isn't. So that's the point Augustine made in one of his works. I believe it was on the nature of grace. And yeah, that's the argument I would put forward against that.
But why does that lead to eternity, though? I mean, we're already talking about a finite situation. Because
the sin being committed is against an agent of infinite goodness. So that would be it. A transgression against something of an infinite quality deserves a recompense of such quality.
But the transgression is planned by him.
Let me answer that.
My God.
I just have one thing to say before I leave. When you're done, Frank.
Yeah, you guys gotta take turns.
Okay. Just before I go, I just want to have a chance to say one thing. That's all I want to make sure. That's all. I'm done for now.
My difficulty is that it basically goes down to one of the early parts in the Bible. God supposedly created everyone with free will, except punished most of the people by drowning them for not being perfect. And that really comes down to the whole situation. The hell concept is punishing people for not being perfect. You know, he wants people. He doesn't want people to sin, but made you sinners. So how can you possibly have justice from a character that creates you to be imperfect but expects you to be perfect, or as perfect as you can possibly be? You know, it just doesn't make sense. It's
ought implies can. Like, if you're commanding me that I ought to do something, then it follows that I could do something.
But that's the point of departure, I think, between you and Jimmy, right? Like, Jimmy, would you say that we can not sin in the case that we do?
No.
Right? So yeah. So you
can do no other than what God plans.
Yeah, I myself would just reject that principle as well. I disagree with Kant that ought implies can. So the example I use for this is, imagine somebody drawing up a contract, and they'll say, I could teach your son or daughter to draw these logically impossible shapes like squared circles and shit. Now, of course, the person tries to actually draw these shapes, but really half-assed it and draws a circle within a square, which isn't really a squared circle by any reasonable definition. But he says, look, ought implies can. A squared circle is a logical impossibility, so you can't really punish me by the faults of this contract. Now, I don't think ought implies can...
sign the contract in the first place.
I don't think ought implies can is the necessary quality here of punishment. I think it's a rational assent and commitment to the action that holds one blameworthy or praiseworthy, not whether or not they could have done that.
My very rational assent is dictated and planned by God. Yeah. The very fact that I assent to evil when I assent to evil, the very fact that I am imperfect, is part of God's plan. He plans this. What does that say of God's nature, that he is planning for these individuals, that he plans out the imperfection of the world for the expression of his glory? What does that say about his glory?
God, it says
kind God to me.
All right. So I would say that God doesn't ordain and thus foreknow. God knows and then ordains it. So God,
which makes him a monster.
Well, no, it doesn't follow. Wait. I'm not, and this is the part where me and Jimmy might come to disagreement on. But the point is, by knowing infallibly what we will do, and then working around our actions in the case of bringing about greater goods, he takes into account our free will choices, and then works around them. I'd say I'm not a libertarian because I don't think alternative possibilities are necessary. But I wouldn't say God is determining every single action. I think,
but he's planning it.
He may not be determining them, but
he's planning to work with them.
So he's actively causing these things.
Quick question.
So he foreknows, and then
I think
So he knows. No, my point is he knows, and then ordains according to what he would know. That's my only point.
So Max.
Yes.
Aren't you a Frankfurtian compatibilist? Like, don't you believe that God reasons by way of negation to? It's going to happen.
Right. Actually, so my point. So the way I would frame the whole free will determinism thing is, while God first has knowledge of the world that he would create. And in terms of, the possibilities of creation, he's going to end up sustaining one of them based on what he knows we would do in our choices. But I wouldn't agree with the determinist in that he determines them from the onset. I would say that God has access to, like the Molinist, I would agree that God knows all these different possibilities and then will choose one because he knows what our actions are. But in knowing these possible worlds, I don't agree with the libertarian Molinist who'll say, these worlds are not determined.
Right.
These worlds do not. Sorry, these worlds are not free. These worlds don't contain alternative possibilities.
What you're saying is God searches through its. Sorry, you.
Yeah, go ahead and let Jimmy respond to Max after, because they're talking to each other.
Oh, so if you imagine in God's intellect, he has knowledge of all these possible worlds. Now, in terms of what he knows we would do in them, we don't have an alternative possibility one way or another. However, because he can look into these counterfactual bits of information, then he creates and allows evil in them, tolerating them, but he actualizes or sustains all the good that's contained within. So he actively wills the good, but passively works around the evils. And he does this to bring about the maximum amount of good he can, or that he wills to glorify him.
I think, so it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Max, but that sounds to me exactly like what both Augustine and Anselm would say. Like, that just sounds to me like, what is the language Augustine uses? He talks about God being like a prism of light through which all possibilities are shot out before him, or something like that. I can't remember. This is really like colorful language to talk about.
It's really skipping my mind, although if you end up finding that section, then I'd be really interested in looking at that, because it does seem poetic.
Okay, so in my opinion, like what you're speaking is a very robust theology, and it's certainly more consistent than like it's way more consistent than like Molinism or something else. But I guess my issue would just be like double predestination. I don't really understand. Basically, this is what I hear as a Calvinist.
Right.
On my view, God is an author. So God writes down literally every fact in existence. The world might as well be one giant, maximally descriptive fact.
Right.
From my Calvinist perspective, right? And God imagines it and then translates that into being. For you, God is more like a really good chess player, where unlike Molinism, his chess moves aren't grounded in things outside of himself, but all of the moves are accounted for in his imagination. And then he just decides which of chess he wants to demonstrate outside of reality. And because he's so good and he knows all the plays that he can possibly make.
But he knows what those. He knows what all those moves will be as well, right? Like,
right.
There's no
right. I'm getting there. So what I don't understand is how does your view not really just circle the drain of mine? Because if God's so good and he accounts for all of the possibilities and he just decides which moves he's going to do to end the game, the only way that he's not determining actions is he's not there being the creator of them. But then on the other hand, you want to say God's the sustainer of all existence. So it just seems like I'm going to throw a cheap shot here. It seems like your libertarianism, Max. I mean, your libertarianism, we all really know you're just circling the drain of my anarchism. Come now.
Right. So I would say, unlike most libertarians, I would discount what's called the criterion of alternative possibilities. I would agree with Frankfurt that that's not necessary. However, unlike compatibilists, I wouldn't say God determines. I'd say that God sustains. That God's way of sustaining isn't deterministic. Rather, God with His infinite imagination would already possess the knowledge of what we would do, and then puts that into place. It's kind of like, well, instead of a chess player, imagine someone who's writing code for a video game wherein, like SimCity. So he already knows what different codes will produce, what actions, and what characters, and what the final effect of all the characters will be. However, when he puts them into place, it's with this kind of knowledge, so he's producing the final product. This way, we don't suffer the analogy of chess, wherein he's playing against someone. And the final vision of the video game, the beatific vision, as it were, it is what we're all really looking forward to. And in that beatific vision, it's going to involve some people being kind of damnified.
But if you author the processor, the memory, the physics related to electrons, everything, right, and then you fire up SimCity and you coded the whole thing, and you put these behaviors in, and you have enough mental wherewithal, mm-hmm, you will know exactly what everything's going to be as soon as you instantiate the game, right? Like you've set up all the conditions by which the game follows through. Right. Tacitly everything's determined, right? Like it's.
So there wouldn't be any alternative possibilities as this game is unfolding. That's true. However, the main point of importance is to remember that the alternative kind of codes and results still retain within the mind of God Himself. As a programmer, He would be the greatest or most maximal programmer ever. He would still know how to produce He would still know how to produce other sets of games and stuff.
Right. So you're just saying that there could be other possible worlds that God could have created. Each one of them would have been determined.
Right.
Each one of them would have been a version of The Sims on this closed box system that God authored, but He didn't. He created this one, so this one is determined essentially, right? And then it would just come down to a question of whether you believe God has necessary qualities that result in Him creating the same game every time, right? Like that would really then end up being a question.
Right. So the way I would respond to that is by saying God passes on those alternatives. That would be the passive will aspect, but God's will is active in creating this particular game. It would be like if I'm drawing the circle, I'm not drawing the square or a rectangle or any other kind of alternative shape. That's, as the geometer, that still retains within it. Those are aspects of the shape I'm passing on. But what's being active is the game itself. Is the shape.
Really quick. The analogy is more like you're on a basketball team, and you're omniscient. So you know you're not the best basketball player. In fact, you suck at basketball. But the guy beside you, you know that if he plays, he's going to win the game. So you decide not to jump on the team. You decide to stay off the court, knowing that this guy over here is going to win the game. Now, what I don't understand is, if God is the one who puts on the game in the first place and then decides to become the basketball player going down there, knowing the whole time, yeah, I'm going to choose not to play because I know this guy's going to do it for me, like, that's still determinism. You're just trying to build such a sophisticated indirection to it that you can still say God's allowing this.
Oh, actually, no, that is a perfect analogy. I actually love that analogy.
That's a terrible analogy. Jimmy set him up. He threw him a softball.
The problem is, I've got to.
Wait, can I just specify why I think that is a perfect analogy? That is a perfect analogy because there are going to be some aspects to which God is going to be indifferent to. Just like there are going to be aspects.
How?
Wait, stop. Can I just finish my point?
Sorry.
So yes, there are going to be. God is doing this indirectly. That's the point. God isn't actively determining every single aspect of it. This is why there are some points of this where that are passive, which God chooses to be passive, but it's ultimately going to be for some greater glory or end. That's the point.
Are you saying he's actively being passive? He's choosing to be passive? That doesn't make sense.
It's worse than
that is actually that. You can. Well, how does that not make sense? You can always be You can always actively be passive. If I'm on the couch and I'm just chilling and I notice, hey, maybe I could go out and do something because someone's asking me to, I could be like, you know what? I'm going to actively choose to chill here. Like,
yeah, but it's worse than that. It's worse than that because in this analogy, he's creating the player that he knows that is going to commit all the fouls, and then creating the penalties for the other team to win, the team that he already knows is going to win anyway.
Let me just because I think, Max, you said earlier that essentially if God created the box for the whole system, we're going to go back to the video game analogy. It's much better, the Sims one. Because God creates the box and all the conditions and everything, and then he runs the sim that he authored, being omnipotent. But you're saying that God could have not drawn a circle, he could have drawn a square. And in that sense, you're saying he could have created a different simulation or changed the variables, right?
Right. There are codes that he's actively using in the simulation, and then there's codes he's passing on. The codes that he's passing on is analogous to the evils that he allows within the world. But in choosing the codes that he does, he can, in the long run, draw about it an even greater good.
Wait, let me finish. Let me just finish. So he populated these passive attributes in the game?
These passive attributes are first manifested. Sorry, God's passiveness is first in his will, and then is manifest within creation.
I'm talking about, like, you're saying that there are other ways that the sim could go, right?
Yeah.
So those other ways are authored, are they not?
Yes, but they're authored in the sense that they're being passed upon. They're
being put in there, but he knows the conditions that, like I said, he knows how electrons work and knows everything else. So he knows which ones will manifest, does he not?
All right. To use an example, let's say that in The Sims he creates two people that he knows are going to screw up in some way, and that he could add an additional code which would prevent that. But rather than adding said additional code, he chooses to pass on that and derive an even greater result at the end by another kind of intervention.
You're just saying that God's considering possibilities that he won't take. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, to draw upon an even greater good within that creation.
He's doing it with full knowledge, and he's choosing it over something else. There's a contrastive choice. It's active.
Yeah, but the will is prior. Yeah, but the will is priorly motivated to the act of creation.
It's causally contingent, though, right?
But it's informed by the knowledge which he is contrastively making a choice, and so it's active.
So, well, I mean, to use David Hume's famous phrase, reason is a slave to the passions. The point is, first God's passion first God's will to create is before all else, then the utilization of the knowledge of what could happen is used. Then, of course, it's put into creation, and of course, in that creation is going to manifest times where God is choosing to remain passive to bring about a greater end through the creation itself.
Look, if God has this general will to create, and then he looks at his knowledge to see what he wants to create, and he chooses, like he has this infinite list of possibilities,
right.
And he's looked at all of them, right? And he says, nah, I don't want any of those, I'm going to choose this one. That's an active choice because he's making a contrastive choice, right? He says, here's my choices, I have looked through all of them, I don't want any of those, I want this one, I choose this one, right? He pressed the button of existence, that's active, right?
Right. So he's
completely active.
In one sense, he's acting on one possibility, and in another sense, he's passing on the other possibilities.
I've got a really good analogy for this. Okay, but
we need less analogies, not more.
No. I think this is a good one. Okay, but you're involved in animated characters. Okay, so if you create a bad character within this animation, do you feel responsible after that character has finished the movie that they need to be punished for the creation that you you created them to be?
No.
I agree. This is the best form of the analogy so far.
This actually is actually an excellent analogy.
I have to say, I mean,
if you have creatures who are so if you have beings who exist in the movie who are so real that they have rational faculties that commit themselves to one choice over another, then yes.
I mean, here's the thing. I saw a quote a while ago.
The way they employed them. You chose that choice over another one as the creator.
God passes on God passes on intervening to bring about a greater outcome and the result of that evil action.
He's fully aware of this thing, right? There's no passivity in this action. He's passing is just like analogical language. But what he's really doing is he's fully freaking aware of all this. And he's choosing
well, like I said in the example of how we will things, when we choose one thing, there are tons of other things that we are simultaneously passing on doing. Likewise, God's will.
Yeah, but like you see, we're not aware of all those things. I'm not aware of all the choices I have at any given time. God is.
But you are aware of that. Doesn't detract from the analogy. The point is that some do exist. Whether they exist in infinite or finite quantity is not pertinent to the image.
Let me give a really quick.
I actively choose against a thing when I choose. If I have my two choices in mind, right? Peanut butter and jelly versus cereal, right? I've contemplated both choices, and I've said I don't want peanut butter and jelly, right?
You guys are.
I could have chosen like yogurt or something, but I didn't think of yogurt, right? I was completely unaware of yogurt. But I think you guys goes against peanut butter and jelly in favor of cereal. This is what God does.
Are arguing semantics. I think you guys are arguing semantics. Like the problem of actively being passive keeps coming up. A better word is deliberately being passive. Like you can always be deliberately passive. You can't be actively passive in the sense that you cannot be passive and active in the same way at the same time. But I don't think that's what Max means. Max just means, look, I am deliberating. I am choosing of my own volition to be relaxed or unactive or whatever it is at this point in time. But again, I think Bert has a more biblical point. Like if God is the animator to this entire film, like what detail was there that he wasn't determinate of?
Right. If you're omniscient, so you just said that you deliberate on choices. This is completely my deterministic view, right? You deliberate on choices, but you chose what you choose because your will can't will what you will, right? So the question is if God is omniscient and knows all moves, what are we talking about when he says that he has possibilities he's not acting on? They're not actual possibilities, right?
Well,
that it's window dressing. It's stuff we could imagine in a possible world, but it was never potentially actual.
Actually, it is. Well, it does have some kind of bearer in God's eternal mind, in the sense that there are possibilities that existed therein, which he passes on, but he goes for the ones that are actualized.
But if he knows them for all time, how are they? How is it potential, or how is it possible? It would seem that the table is set. It is as it is, right? It's going to, especially. I mean, you can get into God's necessary qualities in that he. I don't even think you have to do that. But I think that's a compelling place to go. Is that God has these necessary properties. He is the soul of existence. What variable is acting on him such that he would do otherwise, such that he would opt another possibility? That would counter his omniscience, but it would also counter his being his nature wouldn't have any meaning then. Like, it would be that he has the nature he has, and he may act a certain way, but he may act a different way, right?
So, all right. So, okay, I think I get where you're coming from here. So, in terms of God himself as he would exist, when we consider God as he acts, when both his passive and active will are manifest in creation. So whenever somebody, for example, commits an act of evil, that action is manifest. However, the goodness within that person is still somewhat passively in there. It's just not manifest. Likewise, for example, water has the ability to freeze or to be liquid or to be gaseous. Now, just because it's in one state does not mean that it is incapable of having another state, or that the way it could be doesn't exist within that very object. So God's passivity and activity pre-exist eternally in the mind of God, whereas they manifest one over the other.
Well, yeah, but I mean, to use your analogy of water, let's say you've got a container of water, okay? Now, under your analogy, God can decide whether it's a gas or a liquid or a solid, but knows at what point in existence of that container's existence, which it's going to be at any given time. He knows because he's omniscient. So he created it to be. He created the box and the liquid and the H2O inside, and then decided which it would be when it was created, and then throughout its lifetime of existence, what form it's going to be at any given time.
Well, let me try a different tactic. Going back to the whole computer programmer analogy, just because the programmer is installing one set of code does not mean he does not have knowledge of another set of code. Or just like the mathematician who is in the middle of formulating one mathematical solution does not mean he doesn't maintain passive knowledge of others. The point is things can be passively willed and actively willed, just like knowledge can exist in one form, but can manifest itself either passively or actively.
I think, let me just offer one more thought, and then I'll let Jimmy go, and then we should probably wrap up, because this is getting to be pretty long. But this isn't Nadia's hanging out. I can go to sleep for you if you guys want. I can just sleep in the background over here.
You get like half naked first though, like wear like the most slim tank top that you can find. Just for the rest of us.
Back to the film analogy, I think this is akin to saying, if I watch The Usual Suspects, and I say, some film, let's say I'm watching The Untouchables, and De Niro hits him with the baseball bat, and I say, or let's say I'm thinking he might hit him with a baseball bat, and I say he could possibly not hit him with the baseball bat. But every time I watch the Untouchable, he's going to hit him with the baseball bat, right? Like, I can posit possible worlds, but the movie's always the same, right? And in the same way, I don't see these as being genuine possibilities. Like when you're talking about the water, if I come up on a frozen icicle, I would actually argue that it doesn't have the possibility of not being frozen, because the icicle is part of, like, I don't understand how you subscribe to like principle of sufficient reason and an omnipotent, omniscient God,
Amen.
and then say that there are other possibilities. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like the PSR applies, right? Like,
let me try a different tact. Let me try a different tact with you, Max, because I think, like I said, I think you have a view that's like very virtuously biblical in a lot of what it's affirming. But you made a comment, and I think this comment is like is an easy way in to challenge the Frankfurtian style of compatibilism. And it was the comment something to the effect that there are some things that God is indifferent to, but I don't think you can read. I don't think you can find availability for that in the scriptures. I think if you look at, like, for example, Job, where God goes to so much effort to make Job feel small and tiny in this giant web that God has woven called history, like the story of God's glory. Like neither can you look at Ephesians 2 or Ephesians 1 where Paul says, look, all things have been predestined for the glory of Christ. Like Christ is the fullness of all things. Like everything has been designed around this story that I'm telling, where I come and I save my people. So if your view includes that there are some things that God's indifferent about, I think that's enough to say, then we can't agree with that view, because we have to have a kind of determinism where even the smallest molecule is under Christ's rule. Even the smallest Planck time is still God's property, still has God's handprint indelibly written upon it, where he says, I chose this Planck time, not that one. I chose this one. This is my piece of gold. If anything were different, then it wouldn't be the one that I've chosen.
Okay, I'm going to not go against that, because I have been defending my viewpoint for the last maybe 30 minutes, and I think I've done a good job despite 4 different voices against me. Well, except about 3.5. Jimmy, you're kind of I don't think you're too combative against my viewpoint. So
yeah, it's a robust Augustinianism. Like I respect that.
Okay. Would you like to defend it from a double predestination viewpoint?
Would I defend an Augustinian point of view?
No. Would you defend God predestining people to hell as causal rather than passive?
I would, but I've been following this conversation more because I like you guys. I think it's joyful to talk about these things, and I think they can be edifying. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's all that big a deal, the difference between you and me over that point. I think the big deal it was actually when you said something like God has to be indifferent to certain facts. Like, okay, maybe we don't have to agree on double predestination, but let's not say that God can be stuff, because that sounds to me like we're compromising towards the fatalists and the Molinists. In other words, I feel like we have a lot of common ground over this topic because we're both monergists.
Right. I think maybe a better way to frame it is God can choose to be indifferent at a particular time, but overall there is some use in something. Maybe that would be a better reformulation. Like, God isn't like a molecule. One Planck time existing at one specific point God can be indifferent to it at time whatever, but in the overall plan, of course, it would be needed.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess is sure. God has a human perspective. In other words, yeah, I think God has a human perspective as of the incarnation.
Right.
So,
but I don't think that's what Bert. I don't think that's the point Bert is trying to make. I think. Bert and the others were more talking about the grand scheme, and I think they can. I think you guys can grant each other both those. In the grand scheme of things, in God's creative act, there's not a single thing that isn't there determined. But at the same time, if God takes on human nature, then of course he has a human perspective where he's not thinking about, all of the little facts that he's determined.
Yeah.
Which kind of means he's not omniscient anymore. I suppose
that's a weird one, but yeah.
Yeah.
I've got to read out a quote that's been set out there for ages and ages. I saw it and I'm like, yeah, that's right on. And it's from called Mark Me Up by Mark Me Up 1. And what he said was, wow, justifying sadism under the guise of justice and mercy.
Actually, I think God is very merciful to you. The fact that he doesn't take the lives of sinners and put them through hell immediately and lets them have this little piece is far more than merciful. And that's every little sin we've committed. It's a very pessimistic view. And it's
excellent.
And it is one that causes us to really judge and be very it's one that causes us to judge every little fault of humanity, yes, but
you see, this is
one that causes a reflection nonetheless.
You see, this is wonderful because
that's very humbling, in my opinion.
Not only does that confirm God as a moral monster for creating hell in the first place and creating some people who should go to hell for not believing, which is what he created them to do, but it means that I'm better than God because unlike God, who acts like some child that wants to smash up the toys because he couldn't get his own way, if I was God, I would just say, right, there are some people who reject me and they don't like me. That's fine, because I kind of created them to be that anyway. So just let me finish first. So when they die, they will just blink out of existence. The people who like me and love me and worship me and all that kind of stuff, which is what I want, because I'm a narcissist like that. Those people get to come to heaven with me.
Well, wait. God does not reject human beings for merely not liking or believing in him. God condemns the unregenerate because they are committed to their sins and they remain in them. That is why he condemns them.
But the sin is not believing in him.
We commit to them and we're unrepented. That is worth condemnation. It's not because of a mere lack of belief. Like, that's where atheists, I find, majorly miss the target, at least when addressing the criticism. And yes, when you sin against an infinitely powerful and good God who is the source of morality itself, that is worthy of condemnation. You have spit upon the very cornerstone and the very source of goodness itself, and it's going to receive just that. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. And by the way, if it wasn't for interacting with certain reformed minds, I would never have made this apologetic 2 years ago when I got onto Google+. So I will say that as a positive for people like Jimmy.
The difficulty is, if I was created to be that form, to not have a revelation and just go with the skills that I have, with the knowledge that I have, the abilities that I have, the rationality that I have, to punish me for using that seems immoral, It just doesn't make sense.
So I think, well, hold on, Max. So because I want to end the hangout, and so, but I am going to do Max a favor here and say that if you're to assume the Christian perspective, which Max obviously has a view of God that he thinks is compassionate, then I think you entertain that, and then you internally critique that. You can critique it from the external, but you're only just, if you keep reiterating, you're just going to keep strawmanning Max because Max doesn't think that way. I think the way that a reformed view anyway would be that God is so holy and so righteous that any sin results in, it's not even a choice. It's not God choosing to damn them. It is that they are out of sync or out of relationship immediately upon the act. And actually, I've had a lot of reformists argue that they do much better than I'm willing to do for them, but that the act of actually wrapping up this state of affairs is actually an act of grace. That, like, actually judging and through the saving work, that is actually compassion, not to just let it fester and dwell, and but actually having an end to things is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. But I have tons of issues with that, but that I could could speak about, but I think it's important to ask Max or Jimmy how they view it as, how is it then compassionate, and then internally critique it or whatever. So anyway, thank you for Max. I'm going to thank you first because you took you were a champ through all of that, through a lot of different people speaking at you and offering different thoughts, and so I appreciate it.
I apologize for being a dick.
Well, people get passionate. I think it's hard because everybody, especially when we hit certain topics or whatever, people want to jump in with a thought.
Yeah, this is my thing.
Yeah. But I appreciate everybody's actually keeping it pretty civil and letting people take turns when they did. And Jimmy, thank you so much for hanging out. Actually, this was entirely, as I expected, an entirely pleasant way to spend my afternoon. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing about your own, the things I don't get to hear about when you're in hangs and in comment threads, the more personal aspects I think were really interesting to me. It was nice to spend some time with you. I actually hope maybe after I get through some more hangouts and whatnot, that down the road we can hang out again and maybe have more of a discussion on a certain topic or whatever. We can invite people in or something. So I'd like to chat some more. That'd be fun. So
totally. Thank you so much for having me. I've been wanting to talk to you forever. I was like, oh, this is a really cool guy. I'd love to get to know him. So thanks for talking with me, man.
Yeah. Thanks for making me feel old. So everybody,
I was thinking that too. Like, oh yeah, born in the 90s. I got photos over there that are older than you are.
It is.
Hey, at least.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's weird when you get old because you don't see yourself as old. You start to realize you're old, but I still see myself as like a 14-year-old or something internally. So I have
at least
I have the manhood. I have the manhood of a 14-year-old. Is what I meant to say.
Oh,
what you mean you've not got any pubes yet?
Sorry, go ahead, Jimmy. Thanks for.
I can't believe I just said that.
Taking it back. Well, you said worse in this hangout. So. Go ahead, Jimmy. End us on a good note.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, hey, I'm the guy who has to explain to all my little cousins and buddies at church that there was a time when you had to wait like 10 minutes for an email to send and process and all of that. So like, people are gonna look back and be like, not having internet, what the heck is that? So at least I escaped that.
Yeah, you get to tell your cousins and stuff. There used to be a time where you put music on plastic discs.
Yes, the floppy. Oh, the floppy. Yes.
I was just talking about CDs, but we're like magnetic tape, right? Like that was the revolution. So
I don't know what 8-track tapes are really.
Fun story. Somebody actually took one of those old floppy disks and showed one of their kids, and the kid said, "Oh my, you 3D printed the save icon."
Everybody, I think Steve McRae is hosting a hangout. He wanted to let me know in case people want to head over that way, check it out. And thank you again, Jimmy, and thanks to the rest of you for joining in. So, and thank you, external chat.
Thank you.
So that was a lot of fun. Take care, everybody.